Chapter 2772. Obviously, Sikong was also a little stunned. He did not expect Xiaohua's magical treasure to be activated so quickly. Moreover, the pillar of light sucked in all the spiritual energy in the surroundings. Even the fine lines on the giant trees could be vaguely seen, and a rumbling sound could be heard again. What's the use of this kind of illusion? Sikong sneered and made a hand seal with his right hand. All the sword lights were instantly obliterated, and then a strong golden light shot out from his hand seal. It was like a rising sun or a shooting star that tore through the sky. There was a faint sound, like a sobbing sound. The golden light suddenly cut across the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived first and pierced into the green light. There was a rumbling sound in Xiaohua's mind. He felt dizzy and was about to fall from the sky. The sound of the golden light was actually an extremely powerful sound attack. Xiaohua did not dare to be careless. He used God's guidance naturally. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his mind and stabilized his falling body. Looking at Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia, they were unable to resist the sound attack and had already collapsed on the flowing cloud-flying ship. On the other hand, Xiao Mao was standing on the flying ship anxiously. He was in a hurry to control the flying ship, but he was completely fine. Seeing Xiao Mao control the flying ship to land on the foothills in the distance, Xiaohua was relieved. He clapped his hands and secretly took out the yin-yang sword gourd. Sikong slightly bent body slowly straightened, and the sword light on his body slowly formed again. His slightly tired face showed surprise. Obviously, he did not expect Xiaohua to be able to block the sound attacks so easily. However, the place where the golden light landed was the thousands of giant trees. Swoosh! Like a sharp arrow streaking across silk, the green brilliance split the giant tree that contained the spiritual chi of heaven and earth into two halves. All of the giant trees flashed with a hint of golden light. Then, the green tree suddenly shattered, and the spiritual chi of heaven and earth surged out. The green brilliance was gone, and the broken golden arrow had already passed through the green brilliance and landed in front of the Kunlun mirror. A powerful force came from the Kunlun mirror, shaking Xiaohua's arm. Go! Xiaohua didn't hesitate and urged his magic power once more. At this time, not only was there a green brilliance, but also a blue and earthen yellow brilliance, forcefully stopping the broken golden arrow. Oh my! How do you have such magical power? Sikong was surprised. He knew how powerful the broken golden arrow was. Even a swordsman as strong as Qin Jian was defeated by it. According to Sikong, even if Xiaohua was a cultivator in the late Jindan stage, his sword was enough to break a magic weapon. Xiaohua's Kunlun mirror should be broken. The worst thing was that Xiaohua couldn't easily block such a heavy blow with the Kunlun mirror in his hand. This guy is a body cultivator. Sikong was suddenly enlightened. Only a pair of arms that had the strength of 10,000 caddies could compete with his broken golden arrow. However, just as Sikong was about to form his sword again, Xiaohua opened his mouth, and two green and red sword lights rushed out, flying straight at Sikong's neck. Oh, flying sword? You know about flying swords? Looking at this authentic sword domain flying sword, Sikong was dumbfounded. Of course, on Xiaohua's body, sword lights appeared, and a heart-shaped sword intent formed in the sword lights. Illusory sword 3rd grade. Sikong was shocked. However, at the same time, the green and red sword lights had already stabbed in front of him. The real sword chi and sword lights were like a biting cold autumn wind, scraping against his skin. Sikong opened his mouth, and the small life sword flew out, stabbing at the dream executioner. He didn't dare to recklessly condense the sword energy in his hand anymore, but his whole body flashed violently, and his whole body gradually revealed a golden color. Obviously, Sikong was about to transform into a sword. A huge sword like a broken golden arrow gradually formed in the air. Xiaohua's dream executioner was blocked by Sikong's small life sword, and the mountain splitter couldn't do anything under Sikong's sword transformation. Whoosh! Xiaohua also didn't hesitate and withdrew his two flying swords. Terrifying Phoenix. I didn't expect you to have the cultivation of a sword cultivator. I'm afraid no one knew about this. Si Kongyu's voice was like the cry of a sword. However, even if you're a third-grade illusory sword, you can't transform into a sword like this old man. Today, I'll let you see the power of my sword domain transformation. As he spoke, the broken golden arrow that was held by the Kunlun mirror suddenly disappeared, and when it reappeared, it was actually beside the huge sword that Si Kongyu transformed into. 1. The huge sword let out a sword cry, and the broken arrow returned to the huge sword like a swallow returning to its nest. The huge sword that was originally shaped like a broken golden arrow suddenly increased in golden color, almost illuminating half of the sky. When Xiaohua narrowed his eyes, the sword light once again shrunk, and a huge broken golden arrow appeared in the air. Suddenly, an irresistible sharpness came out from the broken arrow. Even the cold wind within 100 zhang radius was cut by this sharpness. The broken golden arrow just appeared, and then it dimmed, as if it was about to disappear. Not good. At this moment, how could Xiaohua not know that the broken arrow that Si Kongyu transformed into wanted to hide in the air and kill him? He hurriedly waved his Taoist robe, and the two green and red lights from the yin-yang sword gourd rushed out again, and stabbed at Si Kongyu just like the Dream Slayer and the Mountain Splitter. The Slaying Dream and the Mountain Slaying Sword were two beams of sword light. Each beam of sword light was green and red. The yin-yang sword gourd's Slaying Spirit Vital Light was also two beams of sword light. However, one was green and the other was red. The two beams combined were very similar to the Slaying Dream and the Mountain Slaying Sword. In this great battle, who could see clearly between life and death? Who could tell? Seeing the Spirit Slayer Vital Light fly out, Si Kongyu didn't increase his power at all, and the entire sword body suddenly disappeared. Alas, Xiaohua was somewhat regretting that he didn't use the Spirit Slayer Vital Light earlier. Now that Si Kongyu had disappeared, how could the Spirit Slayer Vital Light find him? However, just as Xiaohua was about to use the wind escape technique to fly away and take back the Spirit Slayer Vital Light, the Spirit Slayer Vital Light pierced into the void several meters away from Xiaohua, and the void was not between Xiaohua and Si Kongyu. It was even very far away. Oh! Xiaohua was slightly surprised, but then he was overjoyed. He saw a wave of fluctuation in the void, and in an instant, a golden brilliance pierced through the void. The broken arrow that Si Kongyu transformed into was actually forced out of its invisibility by the Spirit Slayer Vital Light. Not only that, Si Kongyu's sword body could no longer maintain its sword shape under the two green and red sword lights, and an incredulous and shocked face appeared in the huge broken arrow. However, when this astonishment changed, the green and red Spirit Slayer Vital Light wrapped around the broken arrow, and with a loud poof, a surge of blood spurted out. Si Kongyu's head flew out of the broken arrow, and the astonishment on his face would never change in this life. Buzz. Then, with a mournful sound, the light of the broken arrow quickly disappeared, and Si Kongyu's headless body fell from the sky. Fighting with this young master. Your cultivation is still a bit lacking. Xiaohua waved his hand, and Si Kongyu's storage bag fell into his hand, and the 1-foot-long broken arrow also flew in front of his eyes. What is this? It doesn't seem to be a flying sword. Xiaohua's gaze fell on the broken arrow floating in the air. It was still shining with an unusually tragic golden brilliance, and it was extremely dazzling. Big brother. Xiao Mao urged the flowing cloud-flying ship to fly over, and the shock in his eyes was needless to say. He had seen Xiaohua kill Qin Jian before. At that time, Xiaohua had spent a tremendous amount of effort to kill Qin Jian. And now, facing Si Kongyu, who was also at the 3rd grade of the illusory sword, and had defeated Qin Jian before, Xiaohua actually killed him without any effort. It had only been a few short years. Xiaohua's strength had actually undergone an earth-shattering change. It was simply unbelievable to Xiao Mao. Xiaohua stretched out his index finger and placed it on his lips, indicating for Xiao Mao to be quiet. He said softly, "Big brother has always been low profile. Although he claims that he knows nothing other than giving birth, but Big brother still does not want others to know." Yes, little brother understands. Xiao Mao looked at Li Zongbao and Fairy Hong Xia, who were still unconscious on the flying ship. He chuckled and said, "Little brother will definitely not tell sister-in-law about this." As he spoke, his gaze actually landed on the broken golden arrow. Oh! Xiao Hua was stunned for a moment, then he laughed. "You brat, you actually dare to threaten big brother." "How so?" Xiao Mao shrugged his shoulders and said, "This is the first time little brother called sister-in-law. It is very awkward." "Haha." Xiao Hua laughed and pointed at the broken golden arrow and said, "Just because you called her sister-in-law, she also has to give you a greeting gift. But her skin has always been thin, so big brother will give it to you first." "Many thanks, big brother." Xiao Mao was overjoyed. He just wanted to take a look at it, but Xiao Hua actually gave it to him. It could be seen how important he was in Xiao Hua's heart. He saw that Si Kong Yu used this broken arrow and was not even afraid of Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror. This object's origin was definitely not ordinary. As for the method to control it, wait until big brother takes a look at Si Kong Yu's storage bag, then I will give you the jade slip. Xiao Hua said casually. Little brother understands, I will follow big brother's instructions. Xiao Mao nodded obediently. Nonsense, since the object was given, how could he not give the method to use it? Dispose of this guy's corpse, don't let others see that he was killed by a flying sword. Xiao Hua coldly pointed at Si Kong Yu's corpse. Xiao Mao was stunned. Just as he was about to speak, he immediately understood that Xiao Hua was demonstrating his power. Little brother understands. Thus, Xiao Mao no longer asked and flew down from the flying ship. He flew towards the corpse. Xiao Hua could easily kill a third-grade illusory sword expert. In this Heng country, besides Huashan sword, who else could he be afraid of? The three of them were suddenly full of confidence. Chapter 2773. Xiao Hua boarded the airship and looked at Fairy Hong Xia and Li Zongbao. These two were the best of the Dao Sect's foundation establishment cultivators, but their cultivation was too low. Their illusory sword was too much, so it was normal for them to be injured by Si Kong Yu. On the other hand, Xiao Mao seemed abnormal. Xiao Hua had already seen Xiao Mao's abnormality, so he was not surprised. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua did not know how to wake them up, so he could only stay at the side. Looking at Xiao Mao skillfully handling the corpses, Xiao Hua sighed. "Sigh, as expected of a disciple of a famous sect, you know everything. Although I'm also a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, but what the Imperial Thunder sect gave me is really too little? Sigh, I'll just cultivate by myself." Xiao Hua sighed and ordered the primordial spirit in the space to stop working and check the jade slips to see if there were any secret techniques or cultivation techniques. Not long after, Xiao Mao returned to the airship and saw Xiao Hua standing at the side. Fairy Hong Xia and the rest were still unconscious, so he knew that Xiao Hua could not do anything. After all, Si Kong Yu used sound to attack, so who knew how he knocked them out? Although Xiao Hua's strength was enough to kill Si Kong Yu, how could he dare to casually deal with them? Hence, Xiao Mao stood beside Xiao Hua with his hands hanging by his side. The airship was quiet, with only the cold wind blowing. Looking at Xiao Mao, Xiao Hua whispered, "Xiao Mao, don't you think?" "Si nearly fainted. Why didn't you faint?" "That's strange." "I know." Xiao Mao nodded. "When I heard that sound, I also felt extremely uncomfortable. My mind felt like it was turning upside down, but then the sound disappeared. I also don't know what happened." "Sigh, actually it's not just that." Xiao Hua looked at Li Zongbao and Fairy Hong Xia, and whispered the situation in the Brahma Pagoda array, and then smiled. "Looks like your background is not simple. Maybe you have an extremely deep background." "What background? I don't know." Xiao Mao said sincerely, "But I know that big brother is my big brother. I know very well how big brother treats me. My background is big brother's background." Xiao Hua did not comment. He had never thought of borrowing the background of others. "Furthermore, both of my parents are dead. In this world, big brother is my only family. What other background did he have? It has nothing to do with me." Xiao Mao continued, "As for what kind of background he has, he's just a tool for me to take revenge, And also a tool for you, big brother. Haha, don't be so heartless. Xiao Hua laughed. What kind of blood relatives can you have in this world? Big brother is also happy. If you have a good background, it will be good for your future cultivation. This is a good thing. Yes, I understand. Xiao Mao was also happy, but soon after he said with some sadness, actually, little brother is the same as senior martial brotherly. He hopes to find the opportunity to bring his lover back to life. Little brother also wants to see if the mysterious millions of Meng Mountains has, don't even think about it. Xiao Hua resolutely waved his hand and said, I know that you miss your parents and senior martial brother Li, and you miss Kai Zhuoxia. However, they had already fallen, just like Tu Hong and Yu Meng. How could they possibly come back to life? It's better to let them rest in peace. This time, Xiao Mao didn't say, yes, little brother understands, but rather agreed in a low voice with some unwillingness. Xiao Hua still wanted to say something, but he raised his eyebrows, as if he had thought of something. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then both of his hands began to form a spell. Under Xiao Mao's surprised gaze, Xiao Hua used a strange spell to wake up Li Zongbao and Fairy Hong Xia one after another. Strange. Xiao Mao thought to himself, if Big Brother knew this spell, he would have already woken them up. Oh, I understand, Big Brother wants to talk to me alone. Putting aside Xiao Mao, who was thinking about Xiao Hua's strange behavior, after Li Zongbao and Fairy Hong Xia woke up, they still had a splitting headache and were rubbing their temples in anger. However, when they saw Sikong Yu's corpse that was cut in half, they still looked at Xiao Hua with a strange expression. Li Zongbao even whispered, Junior martial brother Xiao, you killed this third-grade illusory swordsman. Why did you make it so bloody? Aren't you afraid that people will know that you killed him? You killed Qin Jian once, and we can still take it as a fluke. If you kill this Sikong Yu, your strength, won't it be exposed? Although I don't know why you're hiding your cultivation level, but since you want to hide it, then hide it until the end. Seeing that Li Zongbao didn't blame him for being cruel, but wanted him to destroy Sikong Yu's corpse, Xiao Hua smiled, waved his hand in the air and said, I've fallen into Qichenyi's trap. The news that I have the Divine Sword's secret manual has already spread throughout Huan country. This Sikong Yu is only the first. After that, I don't know how many swordsmen will come. My Divine Sword Mystic Manual is bait. However, Qichenyi used it as bait for me, but I want to use it as bait for the sword cultivators of Huan Nation. Let them come. If one comes, we'll kill one. If two come, we'll kill two. Sigh, that's right. There's still a long way to go before we reach Million Miles Mountain. I'm afraid it won't be easy to get rid of the sword cultivators. If that's the case, we might as well kill to stop the killing. Fairy Hong Xia sighed as she endured her headache. Alright, then we'll go now. Li Zongbao was helpless and was about to activate the flying ship. Don't be hasty. Senior brother Li. Xiao Hua smiled and said, You and Fairy Hong Xia have to leave a mark on Sikong Yu. Otherwise, I'll be famous in Huan country. That's right, Senior brother Li. We're now heroes of the Great War of Dao cultivators. Our names are famous in the war. Xiao Mao smiled and said, Now that we're deep in Huan country, it's time for us to spread the name of Dao cultivators. The previous 3 made sword cultivators tremble in fear. Now, the 4 of us are enough to make the sword cultivators of Huan country flee. Good. That's how it should be. Li Zongbao thought for a while, then stretched out his hand and said, Give me the immortal piercing whip. Xiao Hua smiled and took out the immortal piercing whip for Li Zongbao. Fairy Hong Xia also took out her innate primordial water and asked Li Zongbao to hit Sikong Yu's corpse. After a while, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia activated the flying ship and rushed into the clouds. Xiao Hua pulled Li Zongbao to the side and said, Senior brother Li, take out 9 drops of your blood essence. What? 9? 9 drops? Li Zongbao hesitated. He understood that Xiao Hua was preparing to repair the immortal piercing whip. However, normal magic treasures only needed 1 drop of blood essence to repair. How could he use 9 drops? Furthermore, 1 drop of blood essence had an effect on a cultivator. 9 drops would be even more exhausting. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua shrugged and said, "How can 9 drops be enough? I need 9 by 9, 81 drops of blood essence. And it must be the blood of the heart. However, these 81 drops of blood essence can be divided into 9 days for me. Also, the time must be different. Blood of the heart." Although Li Zongbao's cultivation was as stable as a rock, he could not help but be moved by Xiaohua's words. What Xiaohua wanted was really too shocking. "You can choose not to give it." Xiaohua smiled and said, "If you use my blood essence to refine it, it will be my spiritual weapon." All right. If it were anyone else, Li Zongbao would have flatly refused. But looking at Xiaohua's smiling face, although he didn't promise anything, Li Zongbao believed that if Xiaohua didn't have a 70% chance of success, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't be like this. Then, Li Zongbao really took out 9 drops of blood essence from the heart. Looking at Li Zongbao's slightly pale face, even Fairy Hong Xia frowned. Xiaohua's actions were really strange. However, this was far from being strange. What everyone saw next was what was truly strange. Xiaohua spat out a ball of red flame from his mouth. This flame was as calm as flowing water. There were no flames soaring into the sky, and there was no heat. Even Xiao Mao inadvertently used his divine thought to sweep it and found that his divine thought could not see this flame at all. This flame was indeed strange, but compared with Xiaohua's sacrificial refining technique, this flame was not strange at all. Xiaohua's hand seals were cast one after another, but the place where the seals landed was not the 9 drops of blood essence from Li Zongbao's heart, but the flame. Under Xiaohua's control, the flame shuttled between the 9 drops of blood essence like a needle. Not long after, smoke and dust flew out from the blood essence. This is using the flame to refine the blood essence? Xiao Mao was stunned and almost forgot to control the flying boat. Big Brother's technique is really perfect. However, after waiting for another half an hour, Xiao Mao realized that what he thought before was really too far away. Xiaohua was not only using the flame to refine the blood essence. Xiaohua was simply using the flame as his own hand, and there was a faint fluctuation of a spell between the flames shuttling. This doesn't seem to be much. When a small shadow condensed from the 9 drops of blood essence, it emitted a bloody brilliance and stood up from the blood essence. Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia were really stunned. Isn't this the legendary Demon Realm's blood coagulation technique? Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao were extremely shocked, and they passed it to Li Zongbao, who was sitting next to them. At this time, Li Zongbao had gradually recovered. He had seen the blood shadow at 1,000 Feet Mountain. He could not understand Xiaohua's spell, but from the blood essence, isn't it a blood shadow? Li Zongbao opened his mouth, but seeing Xiaohua's concentration and the faint sweat on his temples, he did not say a word in the end. After a while, Xiaohua waved his hand and the immortal perishing whip flew out of the space. "Quick!" Xiaohua chanted, and the soul silk flew out from between his eyebrows, grabbed the blood shadow, and threw it into the immortal perishing whip. Then, he took out a few elixirs and put them into his mouth, closed his eyes and cultivated. Chapter 2774. The immortal piercing whip was floating in front of his eyes. Yes, what Hong Xia Fairy, Xiao Mao, and Li Zongbao saw was true. Xiaohua was using the blood fusion method of the demon realm to help Li Zongbao refine the spiritual weapon. In fact, when Li Zongbao mentioned it before, he had already reminded Xiaohua. Although the 7 Spirit Mountains artifact spirit forging technique was incomplete, the only thing missing was the most basic blood fusion technique. And who in this world could understand the blood fusion method better than the demons of the demon realm? Moreover, the refining of the 7 Spirit Mountain spirit required a blood sacrifice and thousands of souls. But didn't the blood shadow technique of the demon realm extract the soul from the blood essence? Using the blood fusion method to condense Li Zongbao's 81 drops of blood essence, then using the blood shadow technique to extract the soul from it, then using the blood shadow technique to send the soul into the immortal piercing whip, and then using the 7 Spirit Mountains tempering method to refine the soul and then awaken it. Wasn't this the method of refining the spirit of the 7 Spirit Mountain? But the most difficult thing was that the blood fusion method of the demon realm couldn't use spiritual power. There was no magic art, only demonic fire, demonic blood, and even heavenly thunder. Xiaohua used the power of heavenly thunder to temper the wishful staff and the ancient silver chain in the myriad Thunder Valley. At this time, he couldn't arrogantly use the heavenly thunder, so the wisp of spiritual fire in the Buddha's relic was just right. It was just that controlling the spiritual fire consumed too much true essence. Xiaohua was already at the early gold core stage, comparable to the early nascent soul stage, but after refining the 9 drops of blood essence, he couldn't bear it. When he saw his immortal piercing whip floating in the air, a faint connection appeared in Li Zongbao's heart. This connection had been cut off by the spirit-devouring insects in the spirit-devouring array. Even if Li Zongbao had refined the immortal piercing whip in the early years, he couldn't stop the spirit-devouring insects from wreaking havoc. Now, under Xiaohua's attempt, just a sacrificial refining made him feel something. Li Zongbao felt that as long as he had a thought, the immortal piercing whip could return to his hand. But he held it in. Without Xiaohua's permission, he wouldn't even think about it. The flowing cloud-flying boat traveled through the first glimmer of dawn. The dawn of Huan country was just like the night from before. It was also extremely long. The deathly white sun hung in the east and did not rise in the slightest. It had already been 2 hours. Xiao Huakai opened his eyes. A trace of joy flashed across his eyes. Previously, when he was in the flame forest swamp, he used the spiritual fire to break the blood-colored seal to save Xiangyang. He discovered that controlling the spiritual fire could improve his cultivation, but he had not used it for a long time. Today, when he used it, it was actually effective. Not only did it consume all of his true essence, even his unstable gold core stage had improved. This is really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Why not? Xiao Hua thought to himself. Junior brother Xiao, how is it? Li Zongbao had 1,000 words to say, but he didn't know where to start. He could only ask in a low voice. It's fine. Xiao Hua waves his hand and says, little brother has underestimated this artifact spirit tempering technique. I'm afraid I won't be able to refine it again in a short period of time. Then it's fine. Li Zongbao also waves his hand. The immortal piercing whip is an inanimate object. Junior brother is a living person. Junior brother's cultivation cannot be delayed because of this inanimate object. Big brother, with your cultivation, you actually still need to rest. Xiao Mao had seen Xiao Hua's strength and is somewhat astonished. It's irrelevant. Xiao Hua knows that he is unable to explain and says with a smile, helping senior brother Li to refine the spirit artifact, big brother's cultivation can improve. However, the second time will be after 9 days. A few days is fine. Li Zongbao does not care at all. Fairy Hong Xia also looks at Xiao Hua with heartache. Her previous anger has already disappeared. The 4 of them all thought that they would be able to refine it a second time after 9 days. Unfortunately, the flying boat only flew for 5 days before 2/3 grade illusory swordsmen caught up with them. 2/3 grade illusory swordsmen. Naturally, Xiao Hua does not put them in his eyes. Even 3/3 grade illusory swordsmen are not below him. However, what about 4 or 5? Furthermore, not all the sword cultivators of Huan country have the bearing to not attack Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia. Facing 5 3rd grade illusory swordsmen, Xiao Hua is somewhat tired of dealing with them. Xiao Hua is currently only at the early nascent soul stage and the attack power of 3rd grade illusory swordsmen is close to the early nascent soul stage. Xiao Hua being able to kill 3 3rd grade illusory swordsmen at the same time is already not bad. If there are 2 more, he really can't do it. Not to mention 5 of them. At this moment, above the blue waves, the 4 3rd grade illusory swordsmen have already transformed into swords. 4 huge swords of gold, orange, light green and grayish-black, each guarding a corner, trapping Xiao Hua in the center of the 4 symbols sword formation. Moreover, 4 sword forces rush out from the tip of the sword and directly press down on Xiao Hua's head and all around him. The 4 sword forces are like a palm that firmly grasps Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's early gold core stage cultivator pressure is simply not enough to resist. Feeling that his surroundings are as solid as an iron bucket, Xiao Hua's face shows a bitter smile. Looking at the flying boat that has already landed on the waves, he secretly complains in his heart. He has already been fighting for dozens of days. The number of second-grade and third-grade illusory swordsmen that died in his hands is already more than 10. The corpses of these swordsmen. Xiao Hua simply didn't collect them. Like Si Kongyu, they were thrown to the side as a deterrent. However, the development of the situation and the temptation of the Divine Sword's secret manual has already exceeded Xiao Hua's expectations. Almost every 2 or 3 days, there will be a swordsman chasing after him. And these swordsmen chasing after him are all second or third grade illusory swordsmen. It can be said that the number of illusory swordsmen that Xiao Hua killed here is almost catching up with the number of illusory swordsmen that fell in the Great Dao Sword War. Although there are many swordsmen in the Huan country, they are after all second and third grade illusory swordsmen, which is equivalent to the middle and late gold core stage cultivators of the Cultivation 3 countries. If they fall one by one, how big of a disturbance will it cause? So, suddenly, 4 third grade illusory swordsmen appeared. Without any explanation, they surrounded Xiao Hua and the others. After one of them sent the flowing cloud-flying boat flying, the other 4 surrounded Xiao Hua and beat him up. Just like before, they were all forced to reveal their illusory swordsmen by Xiao Hua. And before Xiao Hua had time to kill any one of them, these 4 people laid out the 4 symbols sword formation. What makes Xiao Hua the most angry is that the sword forces of these 4 people are firmly suppressing him. This pressure is his weakest link at this time, and now it is suddenly discovered by others. Buzz, the unknown cultivator, activates the huge golden sword. The huge sword trembles incessantly, and a hurricane suddenly rises. Although the huge sword has not yet flown out, the sword chi has already reached Xiao Hua's body, causing the golden light protecting Xiao Hua's body to flicker. Seeing the huge golden sword move, the orange-red, light green, and gray-black huge swords simultaneously emit a strong sword cry, and each of them flies up. The 4 huge swords cut through the air, and the sharp sword chi and dazzling sword light attack the space around Xiao Hua in an incomparably chaotic manner. At this time, not to mention a nascent soul cultivator, even a real illusory swordsman would have to face force with force at this time. Boom! The 4 huge swords chop down at the same time, and an extremely small dot faintly appears above Xiao Hua's head. It seems like the void is about to be split open by these 4 huge swords. However, in the instant that Xiao Hua is about to be split into 4 pieces, Xiao Hua suddenly moves. As if he is using all his strength, he waves his hand. Kachach! In the sky, the dense dark clouds have already covered the sky at an unknown time. Hundreds of lightning bolts, covering the sky and covering the earth, fall down and densely hit the 4 symbols sword formation. The powerful confinement formed by the 4 third grade illusory swordsmen loosens, and even the 4 huge swords slightly trembles. At this time, Xiao Hua's figure suddenly disappears again. The demon realm's concealment technique. Whoosh! The 4 sword lights flashed, but unexpectedly hit nothing. Although the 4 illusory swordsmen's figures are slightly exposed, it is clear that the strong sword cries rise and fall one after another, and they are all extremely shocked. However, when the sword cries rise, the sword power has not yet retreated, but at a place about 10 zhang high in the sky, an intense sword light suddenly appears, and a huge heart shape appears from the sword light. Immediately, Xiao Hua's illusory sword formation fiercely slashes at the light green and gray-black huge swords. At the same time, a wisp of spiritual fire flies out from Xiao Hua's body, which cannot completely transform into a sword. As soon as the spiritual fire comes out, the sword light immediately spreads out like a net and rushes towards the huge golden sword. Even a sword gourd flies out from the side of the spiritual fire, and the 2 green and red sword lights inside it rush towards the orange-red huge sword. Rumble! The light green and gray-black huge swords quickly rise and collide with Xiao Hua's huge sword. The strong sword chi rushed into the sky, and the sword light around Xiao Hua's body rapidly flickers, and his whole body is thrown high into the sky. His huge sword is still unable to resist the 2/3 grade illusory swordsman's huge swords, and can no longer maintain the sword shape. Xiaohua's face is abnormally pale, and it is obvious that he was injured by the 2/3 grade illusory swordsman's head-on collision, but his bright eyes reveal an eager expression. Yes, Xiaohua urged all the magic power in his body, and struggled to break free from the shackles of the four-symbol sword formation, but he is still unable to break free from the sword formation. But this strike of his illusory sword formation blocked 2 of the 4 huge swords, and also caused the circulation of the four-symbol sword formation to stagnate a little. What Xiaohua wants is precisely this moment of stagnation. But when the execution spirit vital light bypasses the orange-red huge sword, a beautiful female illusory swordsman with a shocked expression on her face appeared from the huge sword. This female illusory swordsman opens her small cherry mouth without hesitation, and a lotus root-like small life sword rushes out, seemingly wanting to block the 2 sword lights. Unfortunately, the orange-red sword light flashes, and the small cyan sword flashes extremely quickly. Simply not waiting for the female illusory swordsman to make any extra movements, it has already circled around her neck. An intense sword light flashes out from her snow-white neck, but it is annihilated in the blink of an eye, and blood spurts out from her body. As for the huge golden sword caught in the fire net, the sword light is covered with thin flames. This flame is very quiet, but it is also very bone-eroding. A tall and imposing middle-aged illusory swordsman is also forced to reveal his figure. Chapter 2775. He seemed to be at a loss as he looked at the spiritual fire that could even burn the sword light. Then, a heart-wrenching scream came from his mouth. As soon as that scream came out, it was immediately covered by the sound of continuous explosions, only to see Xiaohua's figure disappear again. Dozens of huge fireballs soared into the sky from below his body. Tender green and grayish-black huge swords violently vibrated within the fireballs. A male and female swordsman wearing strange swordsman attire also revealed themselves. They were the ones who activated the sword light, trying their best to block the fireball jade talisman that Xiaohua threw. When Xiaohua's figure flashed again, he was already above the middle-aged swordsman's head. That black and thick mace was already in his hands. Pooh, as if hitting a watermelon, although the sword light above the middle-aged swordsman's head flashed violently, it was still unable to block Xiaohua's strength. Go! The green swordsman was an old woman. Seeing that something was wrong, she immediately wanted to escape. However, before her sword light flashed, a jade spring fell from the sky and wrapped the 2 huge swords in an instant. Come and help me. Xiaohua had already used up a lot of true yuan to activate the spiritual fire. Although the Buddha Saraira did not use true yuan, he was still unable to support it. He hurriedly called for Fairy Hongxia. Fairy Hongxia was already on the airship, rubbing her hands. However, she did not dare to fly into the battle for fear that Xiaohua would cause trouble. Hearing Xiaohua's call for help, she did not dare to hesitate. She released her Ice Phoenix Dharma body and released a stream of innate primordial water, rushing into the primordial water. Innate primordial water? Seeing that Xiaohua and Fairy Hongxia both had innate primordial water, the 2 grade 3 illusory swordsmen were stunned. At this time, they did not care about anything else. The sword light around them shone brightly, and the sword energy in their bodies also surged. A mountain-like grayish-black sword intent and a grass-like sword intent rushed towards one direction, wanting to break through the innate primordial water. Pew, a burst of sword light rushed into the primordial water, and the primordial water was actually split open. But right at this moment, 2 streaks of green-red spirit-slaying yuan light seeped into the primordial water once again. The old woman was scared out of her wits when she saw the murderous yuan light approaching. The yuan light was too sharp. The swordsman with the golden sword didn't have any power to fight back and died under the yuan light. This was all seen by the old woman. With a loud bang, a string of pitch-black pearls on the old woman's neck broke, and a thick black smoke poured out from the pearls. As soon as the smoke surged out, it immediately spread out. The wisps of smoke were like tentacles that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They intertwined with each other and seemed to want to form a strange shape. Even the wails of ghosts and howls of wolves could be heard coming from the black fog. However, when the spirit extermination yuan light streaked across the thick fog, the green-red light flashed and sliced the thick fog into two halves. All the sounds died down, and the thick fog from before began to dissipate, gradually fading away. The moment it faded away, the old woman's blood sprayed onto it, adding to the desolation. Wu, Fairy Hong Xia didn't stay idle either. She did her best to control the primordial water. Even though she couldn't control it as well as Xiaohua, she was still able to create small waves. The mysterious green-colored primordial water trapped the swordsman within it. Even in the turbulent primordial water, the swordsman's eyes were a little blurred. Of course, this blurriness only lasted for a moment. But just as the swordsman's eyes cleared up, a loud "wung" rang out from above the swordsman's head. Trembling, the swordsman felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. The swordsman turned pale with fright and hurriedly urged his secret technique to resist the attack of Xiaohua's soul tool. Pooh! Xiaohua's figure suddenly flashed out from midair. It was the demon realm's concealment technique. Without hesitation, the wishful staff smashed into the head of the swordsman, who was barely able to resist the attack of the soul tool toad. The last third-grade illusory swordsman was killed by Xiaohua. Hugh, Xiaohua let out a long sigh. His figure directly fell from midair. Fairy Hong Xia was so scared that she didn't even have time to retract her ice phoenix body. She hurriedly flew to Xiaohua's body and let him sit in her arms. AI, so good! Xiaohua smelled the fragrance of Fairy Hong Xia's hair and closed his eyes in enjoyment. To be able to kill 4 third-grade illusory swordsmen in succession, Xiaohua had truly exhausted all of his true essence, and also exhausted all of his mental strength. Big brother. Xiao Mao's voice sounded at an extremely inappropriate time. Granny, can't you speak a little later? Xiaohua almost cursed it out loud. Without any other choice, Xiaohua opened his eyes and tried his best to make his slender eyes round. An extremely bitter expression flowed in his eyes as he replied, I'm fine, it's just that my whole body is weak, I don't have a trace of cultivation. Good. Xiao Mao was frightened by Xiaohua's eyes. He hurriedly shrunk his neck and continued to do what he was best at for the past 10 days. Xiao Mao skillfully collected the corpses of several sword cultivators that were scattered in different places, several hundred feet apart from each other. He took their flying swords and their storage pouches. Then he picked up his broken golden arrow and poked them several times before flying back to where he came from. Okay, at this time, Xiaohua could already stand firm. He clapped his hands and took out a jade slip and handed it to Xiao Mao. This is the method to control the shooting sun arrows. There is a sacrificial refining technique inside. It is a secret technique passed down by Big Brother. Remember, without Big Brother's permission, you can't pass it to others. Hurry up and refine it. In the future, don't use the shooting sun arrows as small swords and randomly poke them. You're really embarrassing the shooting sun arrows. Big Brother really has a way. Xiao Mao took the jade slip and casually stuffed the flying swords and storage bags into Xiaohua's hands. He chuckled and extended his divine sense. Li Zongbao looked at the shooting sun arrows in Xiao Mao's hands, and a trace of envy appeared on his face. He already knew the process of Sikong Yu's death from Xiao Mao, and also knew the origin of the broken golden arrow from Xiaohua. It was actually a legendary artifact, the shooting sun arrows. Junior brother Xiao, Li Zongbao opened his mouth and said, this sword cultivator should be cultivating flying swords. How can he control our Dao Sex artifacts? Especially the shooting sun arrows? It's not that special. Xiaohua stretched and explained. Actually, in the records of the Huan Kingdom, sword cultivators don't use flying swords, but swords. Bows, flying swords, treasured swords, etc. can all be made into swords. Weapon cultivators are a branch of sword cultivators. It's just that sword cultivators nowadays are competing with our Dao sect. Using flying swords is the orthodox way of sword cultivators, and using other swords is like a wild fox. The Flat Mountain Sword Sect can be considered one of the more famous sword sects in the Huan Kingdom. They have both weapon cultivators and sword cultivators in their sect. And this Sikong you can be considered a sword cultivator, and he can also be considered a weapon cultivator. Oh, I understand. Li Zongbao nodded. So sword cultivators also have so many strange things. Not only that. Xiaohua said again, I also saw the inscription armor in a sword cultivator's jade slip. Inscription armor? What's that? Li Zongbao was slightly stunned. You don't know? Xiaohua was even more stunned. Li Zongbao shook his head. I don't know. So it's like that. Since you don't know, just pretend I didn't say anything. Xiaohua didn't explain further. The Utopia faction was a famous Dao sect in the Meng Kingdom. It was better to let Li Zongbao know less about Confucian cultivators. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't say anything, Li Zongbao didn't ask anymore. He looked at the corpses on the ground and felt bitter. He had never felt that he was so incompetent. These third-grade illusory swordsmen were all killed by Xiaohua personally. Fairy Hong Xia's innate primordial water could also help from the side. He and Xiao Mao were purely spectators. What should we do next? Li Zongbao looked at Xiaohua helplessly. Sword cultivators seem to be very interested in your divine sword's secret manual. No matter how many you kill, they will still find you. I'm afraid the four of us are now famous in the Huan Kingdom. Xiaohua sneered. Even if there are people who aren't interested in the so-called divine sword's secret manual, they will be interested in the four of us. Fine. I don't want to play with them anymore. If they come, we'll leave. Can't we just hide? How do we hide? Fairy Hong Xia kept her ice phoenix body and frowned. We're already in the depths of the Huan Kingdom. No matter where we go, there will be sword cultivators from the Huan Kingdom. There's nowhere to run. Why do we have to run? Xiaohua curled his lips and pointed to a place not far away. There seem to be many caves in the mountain peak over there. We'll just go there. There? Fairy Hong Xia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I know that saying. The most dangerous place is the safest place. But there's no place to hide. Sword cultivators can see us with a sweep of their divine sense. Let's go. How can we be discovered by others if we follow this Xiao? Xiaohua waved his hand and flew up. Where was the slightest bit of depleted true essence? Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia didn't know what Xiaohua was up to. But the current Xiaohua was the absolute master of the four of them. What else could they say? Xiaohua very naturally brought the three of them and flew for several li. There were a few mountain ranges here and there were a few blue waves rippling in the ice and snow. Xiaohua only paused in midair for a moment before flying to the bottom of one of the mountain ranges. Beside an unremarkable mountain rock, there was a cave as tall as a person. Senior Brother Li, please wait a moment. After Xiaohua landed, he said calmly. With a clap of his hand, several puppets came out from the space and rushed into the cave one by one. These are puppets? Li Zongbao's eyeballs fell out again. He knew better than anyone else how rare these puppets were. And some fortuitous encounters in the early years. Xiaohua's cultivation was getting higher and higher. There were fewer places where he used puppets. Naturally, he gradually forgot about that cultivator called Mo Qingyun. Chapter 2776. Words written before 10 a.m. The Story of the Cultivation God was uploaded on January 6, 2010. It has been 4 years since then. The third place didn't dare to comment on the story of the Cultivation God, but the results of the Cultivation God were obvious to all. Using Chidian's words, it was a flop. Actually, this result was already known to the third place in 2010. The story of the Cultivation God was signed as a collaboration at the very beginning. It could be said that it was a temporary job for Chidian. Afterwards, the third place always applied to sign a contract, but the reply was always, your work is not up to the standard of signing a contract, please continue to work hard. It was the same for 30,000, 60,000, 200,000. In the end, the third place didn't even apply anymore. Just like that, until September 2010, the story of the Cultivation God had reached 1.2 million words. Finally, the editor sent me a message saying that I could sign the contract. As for why I signed the contract, it wasn't because the story of the Cultivation God was outstanding, but because it was too long. In addition, at that time, many novels had already been signed. I also tried to send a message to the editor on QQ. Although he didn't reply, he still saw it. Because of the hard work of the third place, I signed the contract. After signing the contract, there was a long wait. The editor told me that if it couldn't be published in December, then I should consider stopping and start another book. But the third place clearly remembered that at that time, the third place unhesitatingly replied, "I must finish the book, even if it can't be published." Afterwards, in order to get it published, the third place specially compared the pros and cons of other xianxia novels and sent it to the editor. Finally, in December, the 1.5 million words, The Story of the Cultivation God, was published. Others strongly promoted it, but the third place didn't. Rumor has it that it was a consolation, but the third place didn't understand. The third place only knew that he could finally receive money. Because for an entire year, the third place received less than 200 yuan. Chidian didn't even send him money. As for the number of subscriptions for The Story of the Cultivation God, the third place can't remember. It should be in the single digits or under 30. In short, it was embarrassing. Because when the first volume of The Story of the Cultivation God ended, the number of subscriptions was only around 120. After another year, under the third place's efforts, The Story of the Cultivation God finally ended. According to the third place's thoughts, it should be a new book called Light Tracing. It was a pity that Tanhua was considered a veteran author and should have enjoyed the privilege of directly sending it to the editor via QQ. However, the new editor had to send it via QQ email. Alright, Tanhua knew that Tanhua wasn't a famous author, so she used her email. In the end, the editor sent an email a week later. Tanhua remembered clearly that the editor didn't agree to continue writing the story after The Legend of the Cultivation God. Furthermore, the editor thought, for the readers, there isn't enough immersion, and the story as a whole doesn't have anything that can immediately grab their attention. Everyone writes xianxia novels, so why should the readers read your new book that doesn't have any special features and highlights? Were they going to rely entirely on their old readers? My personal suggestion is to write a new book. Design the beginning of the story well. Chapter 2777. Of course, I know that the editor's suggestion is pertinent. I really am not that kind of genius writer. I can't write a hot-blooded story. After fighting for it again, the editor said, if you want to write it, then upload it. Alas, in fact, the third place just wants a chance to be signed internally. The third place thinks that this is nothing for the third place who has 4 million words of The Story of the Cultivation God. The editors have their reasons. They see the pulse of the market. In terms of market trends, it is right. At the same time, it is also good for the third place. But the third place wants to write his own story, so there is the second part of The Story of the Cultivation God. From January 2012 to today, there are more than 4 million words. Now, it is the #1 xianxia book on Chidian. If the third place listens to the editor, there will not be the second part of The Story of the Cultivation God. The third place is really long-winded. Many people will not read the rest after reading the beginning. But the readers who persevered will read it several times and can't put it down. Especially today, the fourth leader, Flowing Falling Flowers, appeared. It shows that the third place book is still acceptable. Speaking of the 4 leaders, the first one is naturally to thank Xiao Chaoxin. When the third place was sick the year before, she was promoted to the leader. This made the third place very grateful and persevered again. The next one to thank is naturally Pia Piao Xian and Sayawan. Both of them were promoted to the leader last year and supported the third place a lot. The day before yesterday, when the third place was chatting with Big Hammer and said that he was a little depressed, Flowing Falling Flowers became the leader. This really made the third place emotional. This is the encouragement given to the third place. The third place can't let down the love of the heavens and the readers, so he doesn't dare to give up easily. Since we are talking about gratitude, helpless, big hammer, rolling wood and stone is mine, holding plum and smelling flowers, lost ice spring, guitar arbo, life is full of surprises, extreme sky strange clouds, little crucian carp, everyday sy guy, and so on also need to be thanked. In particular, Big Hammer spared no effort to promote the story of the Cultivation God, which made the third place very moved. In addition, there are many readers who are not listed, such as rewards, monthly votes, recommendation votes, and subscriptions. The third place expressed his gratitude. Because, I can't list one by one, otherwise, this chapter will be charged. Haha, the third place is a little long-winded again. Actually, what the third place wanted to say was that it was very difficult for the third place to write a book. After all, the third place was not a full-time writer. It had always been an amateur writer. In order to guarantee the minimum remuneration and to cope with the unknown interruptions, the third place always left a lot of leeway. Furthermore, the novel was neither too fast nor too slow, neither too fast nor too slow. Coupled with the slow development of the story, the third place lost many readers. This was not the fault of the book friends. It was the fault of the third place winner. Therefore, from today onwards, the third place winner decided to get excited and challenge himself. In the future, he would upload as much as he could write every day and use the word count to make up for the slow development of the plot. Moreover, the current Xiaohua was already at the stage of accumulating strength. Let's see how Xiaohua would laugh proudly in the Dawn Rain continent, challenge nascent soul and demigod realm experts, and leave behind an immortal legend in the Dawn Rain continent. Blowing the horn of battle, all readers come to witness and follow the starting point of The Story of the Cultivation God in 2014. Chapter 2778. Li Zongbao smacked his lips and didn't know how to continue the conversation. Well, it's an opportunity from the early years. With the strength of the utmost happiness faction, even his master, Heng Heng, didn't have any puppets. Even among the nascent soul stage masters that Li Zongbao knew, there were only a few who had puppets. But Xiaohua took out a few puppets at once. Although Li Zongbao had told himself countless times that he wasn't surprised, he still couldn't help but mutter a few words. After an hour, a few more puppets jumped out from the cave. Xiaohua put them away and said with a smile, "Everyone please. The rest of the matter will be handled by the famous Xiaohua personally." Fairy Hong Xia and the others didn't understand what Xiaohua was doing, so they could only follow his instructions and enter the cave. The cave wasn't big, but after passing through the cave entrance, there was a huge space below. It was the work of the puppets just now. Xiaohua stayed outside the cave and covered up the traces left behind by the four people. Only then did he carefully fly into the cave and cast out the capital star array's spirit talismans one by one, covering the entire space. When Xiaohua formed a seal with his hands, the entire space disappeared. Even the entrance of the small cave turned into the same as the surrounding stone walls. Sensing the fluctuations of the array, Li Zongbao and the others released their divine senses. Seeing that the array was so tight that their divine senses couldn't penetrate, the three of them sighed again. At this time, no one spoke. This Xiaohua, except for giving birth, he knew everything. If the three of them hadn't followed Xiaohua on this trip to the Huan Kingdom, they wouldn't have known that Xiaohua, in addition to his cultivation level, could also transform into a sword, had the soul-slaying vital light to kill people, spiritual fire, jade talismans, demonic weapons, soul tools. Any one of these secret techniques was already shocking enough, but Xiaohua actually took them out in an orderly manner. Every secret technique he took out could reap the life of a grade 3 illusory swordsman. Li Zongbao finally understood why Xiaohua didn't dare to let others discover his true cultivation level, and why he didn't make a move. Once he made a move, he would kill them all. Just in time. Xiaohua looked at the stunned three people and smiled. Taking advantage of this leisure time, I'll refine Senior Brother Li's spiritual tool. Senior Martial Brother Li is so powerful, it's really a pity that you don't have a magic treasure. Even though Li Zongbao's heart was as calm as an ancient well, he still blushed a little when he heard those words. Of course, Li Zongbao also believed that Xiao Hua was purely speaking without any intention of ridicule. However, before the great battle of Dao and Sword, Li Zongbao's notion of being number one below core formation had long since transformed into smoke. A kind of thought of, there's always someone better than you, spontaneously arose in his mind. Thank you for your trouble, junior brother Xiao. Li Zongbao casually said a few words and found a place to sit down. He took a pill and closed his eyes to meditate. Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao also looked at Xiao Hua. They knew that there was nothing they could do to help. One of them took out God's guidance, while the other took out the sun-shooting arrow's jade strips. Both of them started to meditate. The shock they received was actually no less than Li Zongbao's. This was especially true for Fairy Hong Xia. The pressure she felt was not just from Xiao Hua alone. Xiao Hua had previously helped Li Zongbao refine the immortal poking whip twice. Later, due to the increasing number of sword cultivators chasing after them, he did not dare to waste his true essence to control the spiritual fire. While avoiding the sword cultivators, Xiao Hua refined the whip 7 times one by one. Of course, Xiao Hua spent nearly 100 days refining the whip 7 times. Outside the cave, there were still some fearless illusory swordsmen chasing after them. However, when they saw the corpses of the 4 third-grade illusory swordsmen, most of them gave up the idea of killing them. Only 5 or 6 of them did not give up their evil intentions and continued to chase after them. However, at this time, they did not dare to act alone. Even if there were 4 of them together, they were still worried. In the end, the 5 or 6 of them gathered together. Of course, behind them, there were many second-grade and first-grade illusory swordsmen following them from afar. These swordsmen did not dare to come close. They seemed to be the disciples of the third-grade illusory swordsmen or other disciples of the Sword Gate who wanted to take advantage of the situation. These swordsmen ignored the cave where Xiao Hua and the others were hiding. Even if some sword cultivators used their divine sense to scan the area, they would not be able to find the 3 people inside the capital star array. On this day, after Xiao Hua sacrificed the last 9 drops of blood essence to produce a thin blood shadow, Xiao Hua once again muttered and pointed his finger at the immortal piercing whip that was floating in the air. A blood-red little person scuttled out from the immortal piercing whip. This little person had a nose and eyes, and it somewhat resembled Li Zongbao. Quick! Xiao Hua pointed at the thin blood shadow again. The blood shadow rushed into the little person with a whoosh. Suddenly, the little person emitted a thick blood-red light. Big brother Li, sit down. Don't resist. Xiao Hua looked at Li Zongbao, who was beside him, and said in a low voice. Oh, okay. Li Zongbao thought that everything was done. He did not expect that Xiao Hua still had other instructions. Therefore, he did not dare to neglect and sat cross-legged beside Xiao Hua. After Li Zongbao sat down, Xiao Hua extended his left thumb and slowly pressed it between Li Zongbao's eyebrows. Whoosh! A sound like flowing water came from the place where the thumb touched. A sapphire blue light blossomed along with Xiao Hua's thumb. Looking at Li Zongbao's expression again, the moment the light blossomed, it slightly stagnated and then returned to normal. Xiao Hua's hand drew an arc in the air. That sapphire blue light fell like a meteor into the blood-red little person in the air. Pooh! As if a candle was lit, a sapphire blue flame appeared in the blood-red little person's body. Following the burning of the flame, wisps of faint smoke rushed into the air. The blood-red color of the little person's body dimmed along with the faint smoke. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the little person had become transparent. However, the more transparent the little person was, the more obvious the outline of the human figure was. Go! Finally, Xiao Hua released his soul thread again and sent the little person into the immortal poking whip. The moment the little person entered the immortal poking whip, a sapphire blue light like a clear spring appeared at the tip of the immortal poking whip and quickly flowed towards the entire immortal poking whip. Pow, 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 pow. It sounded like beans being fried. Runes began to peel off the surface of the immortal piercing whip. As the rune disappeared, more and more runes appeared one after another, layer after layer, like bamboo shoots sprouting from the ground. Immediately, a sapphire blue light filled the entire space. When the runes reached the end of the immortal piercing whip, a loud buzzing sound was emitted from the immortal piercing whip. The sapphire blue light abruptly retracted from one end of the immortal piercing whip and rapidly surged to the other end. Whoosh! Without waiting for the light to flow to the other end, the light at the tip of the whip suddenly rushed out of the immortal poking whip and rushed into the stone walls of the space. It pierced through the capital star formation's defense and rushed into the sky outside the cave. Spirit tool? Heavenly omen? Xiaohua's body tensed up. He felt the sword origin in his body rapidly circulating. The Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter were about to come out of his body. Xiaohua couldn't help but groan. The sapphire blue brilliance shot several hundred feet high before falling back down. After the brilliance of the immortal piercing whip flashed 9 times, the entire brilliance was suddenly restrained within the immortal piercing whip. There was no longer any movement. However, Li Zongbao, who had already opened his eyes, already felt that the immortal poking whip had an indescribable connection with him. He seemed to be the immortal poking whip and the immortal poking whip seemed to be him. Although he didn't make any hand seals, as long as he willed it, the immortal poking whip would definitely attack according to his will. Good. Seeing this, Xiaohua clapped his hands and said, "The spirit tool is done. Senior Martial Brother Li, as long as you nourish it with your primordial spirit, the spirit inside the spirit tool will sprout and gradually grow. In the future, my hard work will all depend on Senior Martial Brother Li." Then, Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense again and said with a bitter smile, "This spirit tool has only just been refined, but it can actually break my formation. If Senior Martial Brother Li successfully nourishes it in the future, what kind of power will it have? Little brother is looking forward to it." He, Li Zongbao let out a rare laugh. "This is all thanks to Junior Martial Brother Xiao. My immortal poking whip has seen the light of day again." As he spoke, Li Zongbao held the immortal poking whip in his hand. However, seeing that it was already completely different from the previous immortal poking whip, he laughed again and said, "This immortal poking whip is no longer the immortal poking whip. Junior Martial Brother Xiao, what do you think this spirit tool should be called?" Previously, it was a magic tool that could kill one person with poke. Now that it is a spirit tool, one whip can kill several people, dozens of people, or even hundreds of people. Why don't we call it the Immortal Killing Whip? Xiaohua said after thinking for a while. Okay, let's do as Junior Martial Brother Xiao says. Li Zongbao said happily, "This thing will be called the Immortal Killing Whip in the future." "I can, but don't tell Senior Martial Uncle Heng Ming that this is little brother's work." Xiaohua nodded. "Of course." Li Zongbao wanted to say something, but Xiaohua's expression suddenly changed. Without waiting for him to say anything, Xiaohua said to Fairy Hong Xia, "Hurry up and leave. There are swords chasing after us." "What? Swords?" Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao turned pale with fright. They knew that they were definitely not a match for swords. If they stayed here, they would only be a burden to Xiaohua. They immediately flew up from the ground and rushed out of the space. Fairy Hong Xia was still transmitting her voice to Xiaohua, telling him the location of the meeting. "Senior Martial Brother Li, you should go too." Seeing that Li Zongbao was hesitating, Xiaohua urged, "The weapon spirit of the immortal killing whip is not formed yet, you can't help me much. Why don't you go and protect Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia? I'll leave the 2 of them to you. But even if I have to give up my life, I will ensure their safety." Li Zongbao knew that this was not the time to hesitate. He swung the immortal killing whip and chased after Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao without looking back. Chapter 2779. Fairy Hong Xia was still reluctant to leave. She watched as Xiaohua calmly kept the capital star array's spiritual talisman. Only then did she turn around and release her spiritual sense, which circled around Xiaohua. At this moment, a furious spiritual sense came crashing towards her like a tidal wave. At the same time, A sharp sword will rush towards her like 10,000 swords, forcing Fairy Hong Xia to retract her spiritual will. Xiaohua looked coldly at the origin of the divine sense. He did not panic and flew into the sky. After identifying the direction, he flew in a different direction from Fairy Hong Xia. Facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiaohua was confident no matter how many of them there were. He did not ask Fairy Hong Xia and the rest to hide. However, facing a swordsman with a sword illusion, Xiaohua did not have the slightest confidence. Especially since the swordsman was willing to disregard his status and come looking for Xiaohua. Then, the safety of Fairy Hong Xia and the rest would be a problem. Therefore, Xiaohua had to make a choice. He was alert in his heart. When he sensed a swordsman approaching, he immediately asked Fairy Hong Xia and the rest to leave. He stayed behind to hold back the swordsman. Fairy Hong Xia's heart was really like a ball of ice, melted by Xiaohua's courage and care. If not for Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao by her side, she would have stuck to Xiaohua's body and become one with him. Fairy Hong Xia even wanted to stay behind and face the furious swordsman with Xiaohua. However, she knew that her cultivation was far inferior to Xiaohua's. She would only be a burden if she stayed behind. What she wanted to do was to grasp the opportunity of this trip to Meng Mountains and increase her cultivation base. She wanted to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Xiaohua as soon as possible, and be able to laugh proudly together with him. Xiaohua flew up into the sky. He didn't use the Imperial Thunder transformation. Instead, he used a simple wind evasion technique and flew towards the direction where the sunlight was rising. The orange sunlight shone on his face. His phoenix eyes were slightly opened. His eyes were filled with spirit, showing off a boundless elegance. That infuriated spirit consciousness swept over from all directions. The moment it came into contact with Xiaohua, it came to a stop. It no longer swept towards the direction of Fairy Hong Xia and the others. Evidently, Xiaohua was the target of this sword. Seeing that the swordsman's divine sense had locked onto him and did not chase after Fairy Hong Xia, Xiaohua was relieved. But then he was a little surprised. After all, when he, Li Zongbao, and the other two barged into the Huan Kingdom and killed those second and third grade illusory swordsmen, they left behind traces of their magical weapons. Just from these clues alone, it was impossible to separate Xiaohua from the four of them. There was no reason for him to only chase after Xiaohua and not look for Fairy Hong Xia and the others. After all, there were three of them. Oh, I understand. Xiaohua sneered. It must be Qi Qingyi from the Seven Spirit Mountain. Since he used the Celestial Sword Secret Manual as a cover to lure the sword cultivators of the Huan Kingdom to come and kill Yi Zichen would not be able to do anything about it. And when I was breaking the Brahma Pagoda's array, I was also breaking the array by myself. How could he not know yours truly's bottom line? This young master was still kind at that time. I shouldn't have let such a scheming person off that day. But this is good too. Xiaohua thought to himself again. I will transform into a sword, and even attract the attention of other illusory swords. Senior brother Li and the others will be able to safely pass through the Huan state. Let's meet again after I escape from this sword transformation sword. However, when he thought of escaping from the sword, Xiaohua narrowed his eyes slightly, and there was an impulse in his heart. Hey, I am now in the Jindan realm, and my strength should be comparable to Yuanying realm. If I only think about escaping from this inexplicable sword, wouldn't it be a waste of more than 700 Lingli pills? Xiaohua slightly released his divine thoughts. When it touched the divine thoughts of the sword, he immediately retracted it, and the flying speed was slightly accelerated. After flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiaohua once again released his Buddha's consciousness. After taking a quick look, he suddenly accelerated his flying speed again. His figure actually turned in another direction. Immediately, in the next half day, Xiaohua kept changing his direction, and the flying speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Speaking of the experience of escaping, Xiaohua was absolutely first class. He always kept a certain distance from the sword. Finally, there was an endless ice lake in front of him. There was a thick layer of ice on the ice lake, and sometimes there was some broken ice. The blue waves rippled, and there were many huge icebergs between the ice layer and the blue waves. Xiaohua took a deep breath, flew into the ice lake, and landed on an iceberg of hundreds of feet. He put his hands behind his back, turned around, and looked at the distant sky with an extremely calm face. The divine thoughts of the sword were locked on Xiaohua from the beginning to the end, and through the divine thoughts, an undisguised shame and anger was transmitted. It was obvious that the sword was irritated by Xiaohua's almost provocative escape. Although the figure of the sword had not yet appeared, the threatening sword essence was getting closer and closer. The sword origin in Xiaohua's body was stimulated, and Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter couldn't help but make a sword sound. Xiaohua's body also emitted a faint sword light. The sword really can't be mentioned in the same breath with the illusory sword. Xiaohua slightly sighed in his heart, but at the same time, he had some expectations. A light purple sword brilliance was born in the distant sky, like an extremely gorgeous meteor across the sky. The purple reflected the orange-red sunlight, giving out a sparkling brilliance. This brilliance was like a blooming camellia, and the petals swaying in the wind were the flickering sword energy. At this time, the sky was dotted with white clouds, like sheep leisurely scattered on the grassland, and it was quiet. When the sword energy of the sword appeared, it actually split the whole sky into two halves. The white clouds were smashed by the sword energy and turned into cotton wadding. What killing intent! Feeling the threatening sword essence become colder and colder, like the winter wind wrapping around him, even the power of imprisonment and the desolate killing intent became denser and denser. Not only did the surface of his body feel heavy, even the true essence and sword origin in his body gradually solidified. Xiaohua sneered, and with a clap of his hand, the seal of the ocean appeared. Under the urging of his transcendence energy, the seal floated above Xiaohua's head, and an earthen yellow brilliance sprinkled down, protecting Xiaohua within. Buzz! That purple camellia flower flew several li away. That intense sword humming sound resounded through the entire frozen lake. Fine lines began to appear on the thick layer of ice. Waves began to rise on the water surface that had yet to condense. Swoosh, countless sword lights sprinkled down and actually covered the sky above the ice lake. Small camellia flowers actually bloomed all over the sky. However, when the sword howl came to an abrupt end, the camellia flowers had also stopped at a height of 300 m above Xiaohua. The camellia flowers that covered the entire sky flickered and converged towards Xiaohua's location before descending. Strands of fierce sword energy pierced through the camellia flowers and pierced toward Xiaohua. When they were less than 300 m away from Xiaohua, the camellia flowers actually transformed into thousands of rays of sword energy that surged toward Xiaohua's head like a myriad of streams returning to their source. Go! Xiaohua sneered and pointed his finger. The seal of the ocean that had been accumulating power immediately shone brightly and suddenly expanded. The coiling dragon on the seal roared and met the sword light's head-on. Rumble! A violent roar resounded, and at the same time, an intense brilliance was emitted. Waves of energy were emitted from where the magic treasure and sword energy collided, and huge waves of several zhang formed above the ice lake. The thick ice that originally had some cracks had long been shattered, and pieces of ice that were several feet large and several inches small were lifted into the air, then fell into the ice water, and rippled along with the waves. Not bad. As expected of a terrifying phoenix. As expected of Nameless, who shocked Lu Rucheng. This cultivation is worthy of this sword making a move. A thin voice came from the camellia flowers in the sky. Immediately after, the sword intent of the camellia flowers gradually converged, and a beautiful woman wearing a purple sword robe appeared from the sword brilliance. Xiaohua originally had a smile on his face, but when he heard the woman's last sentence, he unconsciously frowned, and his gaze fell on the woman. This woman was in her 20s, but the facial features on her face were somewhat rough, and she had a kind of thick eyebrows and big eyes. Although she looked very pretty, she was far from the kind of little bird that relied on others. Perhaps it was more appropriate to call her a tomboy. Moreover, this woman's skin was also rough, and the sword brilliance that had converged into her body did not completely enter her body. There were still several strands of sword energy that were as thick as a child's arm coiled around her body like pythons, and they were even slowly swimming around. This Xiao doesn't know what you are talking about. Xiao Hua sneered. This Xiao only came to Huan country with a few senior brothers to gain experience. I don't know why, but not only were there illusory swordsmen intercepting us, there are even transforming sword seniors coming to stop us. Could it be that in this Huan country, there is no such thing as status? Any high-level swordsman can attack and kill a low-level swordsman? If a Foundation establishment cultivator attacks and kills a third-grade illusory swordsman in a great battle. This sword can relate this matter to sneak attacks, carelessness, and encirclement. The woman smiled faintly, revealing some yellow and white teeth. Those teeth were actually a bit bigger than others. However, this Foundation establishment cultivator killed second-grade and third-grade illusory swordsmen one after another. Do you think this sword will still treat this Foundation establishment cultivator as a Foundation establishment cultivator? Moreover, right now is a great battle between Dao cultivators. This cultivator actually crossed the battle line and infiltrated into the depths of my Huan country, causing a storm of blood. Do you know what he is plotting? How can this sword not come? What kind of status can this sword have to worry about? At this point, the woman looked at Xiao Hua with interest and lightly pointed with her finger. Moreover, this cultivator actually has my sword cultivation's ultimate technique, and there is even sword origin in his body. He even obtained my Huan country's divine sword secret manual. Tell me, how can this sword not be curious and come to take a look? Hiss, Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He had revealed his illusory sword cultivation in Huan country, but every time he used it, it was a one-hit kill, never leaving anyone alive. Moreover, when he broke the Seven Spirit Mountains Brahma Pagoda formation, he did not use a flying sword at all. He did not know how this sword woman knew that he had sword origin in his body. Chapter 2780. Senior, you're wrong. Xiao Hua said in astonishment. Junior is indeed a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect, and I'm also the so-called Terrifying Phoenix. Junior doesn't intend to hide this. Furthermore, when this junior was passing through the sword tomb, I once said this to a senior who transformed into a sword. How could junior be a sword cultivator? Moreover, the so-called divine sword secret technique is nothing more than a false accusation by Qi Qingyi of the Seven Spirit Mountain. He wanted to borrow the hands of a group of illusory sword sect disciples to kill Junior. How could he carelessly give such an important secret technique to Junior? If he didn't give it to Junior, can't you snatch it? If Junior really did snatch it, how could he survive? Can he still return alive? Xiao Hua proudly retorted. Yes, yes. The woman nodded vigorously. Qi Qingyi is an illusory sword sect swordsman, and there are many Seven Spirit Mountain swordsmen following him. They even have their Brahma Pagoda formation. Even that can't stop you. And from your tone, you can even kill them all. Tell me, how could this sword not come? Xiao Hua didn't expect that he would still leave a bad impression and let this illusory sword sect swordsman feel that something was wrong. If Senior doesn't care about your reputation as a sword transformation senior and wants to deal with Junior, then there's nothing I can do. As long as Senior doesn't spread the news and doesn't damage Senior's reputation, then it's fine. Xiao Hua said indifferently. Didn't you just say it? If you were willing, you wouldn't have let Qi Qingyi spread the news about the divine sword secret technique. The woman laughed. Why can't this sword say that? Senior is indeed qualified to say that. Xiao Hua's voice was still calm. However, does Senior have the confidence to keep Junior here? Why can't this sword keep you here? The woman coldly said, even if you have the ability to kill a third-stage illusory sword sect swordsman, can you escape from this sword's hands? Junior has no grievances with Senior. If Senior wants to bully the weak, Junior has nothing to say. The true essence around Xiao Hua's body slightly flowed, and his eyes flashed with a trace of excitement. No grievances? The woman sneered. This sword is Xue Mingcha of the Void Heaven Sword School. Let's not talk about the Dao sword competition, just the fact that you killed my Void Heaven Sword School's Qingjian is enough reason for me to kill you. I see. Hearing this woman call herself a swordsman of the Void Heaven Sword School, Xiaohua immediately extinguished the hope in his heart. He pointed at the overturned the sea seal and created several hurricanes to suck in the surrounding spiritual energy. Ha! You're really bold. Seeing this, Xue Mingcha laughed and said, in the face of this sword, you actually didn't run away, nor did you surrender. You even want to put up a desperate struggle. If you don't have a nascent soul cultivation, who would dare to have such a plan? Wang, at this moment, Xiaohua didn't say anything else. He activated the seal of overturning sea and smashed it towards Xue Mingcha. Xue Mingcha put his index finger and middle finger together and pointed at the air. With a shing sound, like a sharp sword being unsheathed, a ray of sword light flew out from his fingers and hit the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, the ray of sword light was shattered into pieces. The seal of ocean only rolled slightly in the air and came down again. Not bad, not bad. Xue Mingcha nodded as if he was praising Xiaohua. He looked at the seal of ocean surging with a strong imprisoning force. It set off several gusts of wind and shrouded the space around him. When Xiaohua was still in the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, the seal of ocean was already very powerful. Now that Xiaohua was in the Gold Core realm, the spiritual energy in his body was as vast as the ice lake under his feet. The power of the seal of ocean had reached another level. The space around Xue Mingcha gradually solidified from top to bottom. Not even the slightest breeze could penetrate it. In fact, when the seal of overturning the sea was about 10 feet away from Xue Mingcha's head, the coiling dragon that had been coiling around the seal suddenly charged out. It roared as it charged towards Xue Mingcha with the seal in its mouth at lightning speed. Its great strength and indescribable power were so great that even a mountain would be smashed into pieces by it. However, Xue Mingcha, who hadn't moved all this time, revealed a mocking smile. Then, sword light shot out from her body in all directions. Every ray of sword light was a sharp flying sword. In an instant, they shattered the confinement of the seal of ocean. Moreover, Xue Mingcha stretched out both hands. 10 rays of sword light flew out from the 5 fingers of both hands and attacked the seal of ocean. With a crack sound, several of the 10 rays of sword light blocked the seal of ocean. The seal of ocean rolled several times and couldn't fall down. The other rays of sword light were even more powerful. With a schwa 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 sound, they actually cut the roaring coiling dragon in half. The shadows flashed in the air and turned back into the shape of a dragon and landed on the seal. The attack of a sword is indeed powerful. Seeing that Xue Mingcha didn't turn into a sword and blocked the seal of ocean, Xiaohua sighed in his heart. The thought of using the Kunlun mirror was also extinguished. However, his body suddenly moved. He flew towards the distance. Where do you think you're going? Xue Mingcha naturally paid attention. Seeing that Xiaohua wanted to escape, she hurriedly waved her hand. Several rays of sword light appeared and surrounded Xiaohua from several directions. Hee, Xiaohua sneered. His body suddenly disappeared. Oh! Xue Mingcha frowned slightly. Her divine sense swept over like a waterfall. However, the area within 100 feet was empty. She didn't see Xiaohua at all. Xue Mingcha snorted coldly. The sword light around her body shone brightly. Her entire body gradually revealed the outline of a huge sword. Rays of flying swords flew out from the huge sword. It was as if 10,000 arrows had been shot at the same time. Kacha kacha. A series of crisp sounds came from several feet above Xue Mingcha's head. Then 2 rays of sword light, one green and one red, flew out from the place where the crisp sounds came from. They flew toward Xue Mingcha's neck from top to bottom. The sword light was extremely fast, far faster than the sword light that Xue Mingcha sent out. The 2 rays of sword light even dodged the flying swords. Just as Xue Mingcha's gaze swept across the sky and saw Xiaohua's figure appear there, the green and red rays of sword light pierced between Xue Mingcha's neck Xiaohua actually didn't escape far away. Instead, he closed in on Xue Mingcha in a moment. When he used the Devil Realm concealment technique, he sent out the spirit-slaying vital light. Gotcha! The green and red rays of sword light flashed. However, the blood light that Xiaohua expected didn't appear with the flash of sword light. Instead, a light purple sword light appeared on Xue Mingcha's neck, blocking the spirit-slaying vital light outside of the sword light. Not good. This spirit-slaying vital light can't kill a sword. When Xiaohua saw that the spirit-slaying vital light couldn't do anything, his heart went cold. He hurriedly pointed at the sword gourd and was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying vital light. How dare you! Although the spirit-slaying vital light didn't hurt Xue Mingcha, it really gave Xue Mingcha a fright. In addition to being frightened, Xue Mingcha was also angry. His figure flew up, and his hands that had not yet transformed into swords suddenly stretched out. Two thick sword lights were like pillars as they pierced straight toward Xiaohua's abdomen. At the same time, the sword light on her body flourished. A suction force was born from the sword light, and it actually sucked in the spirit-slaying vital light. Withdraw, Xiaohua was shocked. The golden core in his body suddenly surged and rushed into the sword gourd. A layer of silver appeared on the sword gourd, and even the golden threads that never appeared before were faintly discernible. Whoosh! The suction force inside the sword gourd increased greatly under Xiaohua's urging. Finally, the spirit-slaying vital light was absorbed into the sword gourd. Who's afraid of you? Seeing that the spirit-slaying vital light was withdrawn, Xiaohua's heart was a little relieved. With a flick of his sleeve, the sword gourd was absorbed into the space. He roared again, and his eyes flashed with fanaticism. He raised the wishful steel staff, and his figure suddenly accelerated towards the sword light. Rumble, a loud noise sounded. Xue Mingcha's eyes showed obvious surprise. Xiaohua's figure was not blown away by the sword pillar as she imagined. Instead, the thick sword pillar was actually defeated by the wishful steel staff. Xue Mingcha's surprise was only a flash, and then she waved her hands again. The pillar-shaped sword light disappeared, and a wave of sword light rushed toward Xiaohua like a tide beating the shore. Come on! Xiaohua roared, and the wishful steel staff also rolled, and like a countercurrent, it flew towards Xue Mingcha. A ray of sword light was shattered, and a piece of sword chi was scattered. Oh, you really have some skills. Although the yin-yang sword gourd was refined by you just now. Xue Mingcha's gaze fell on Xiaohua's wishful steel staff, and her thin voice now had a hint of a sword cry. But this demonic weapon is very powerful. I'm afraid that the disciples of the illusory sword sect have suffered a lot because of this demonic weapon. It's more than suffering a loss. Xiaohua sneered. This demonic weapon of this young master is stained with the blood of many swordsmen. But I'm going to taste the blood of the illusory sword sect. Ha, arrogant. It's simply arrogant to the extreme. This sword has never heard of a Dao sect cultivator actually using my sword gourd to kill the illusory sword sect. Xue Mingcha's voice was sharp, and wave after wave of sword flow rushed toward Xiaohua. The sword flow followed Xue Mingcha's voice and also showed a wave, smashing toward Xiaohua like a mountain. This mountain and this wave were composed of sword light, and it was somewhat similar to the sword condensing the world in the Golden Destruction Array. However, these sword shapes could only flow and could not be condensed. Obviously, Xue Mingcha's sword cultivation was advancing towards the sword condensing the world. Fight! Xiaohua was not afraid at all. He waved his arms and rose up in the sword flow. In this way, the two people confronted each other for half a cup of tea's time. Xiaohua was unable to get close to Xue Mingcha, and Xue Mingcha was also unable to injure Xiaohua. Seeing that this move was futile, Xiaohua waved his hand and collected the seal of turning the sea in midair. While one hand was still waving the wishful steel staff, the other hand displayed the thunder attraction technique. Kachin in the sky, the sound of thunder was faintly heard, and a large number of dark clouds pressed down. As expected of the terrifying phoenix. Where is your Dharma body? Xue Mingcha's eyes revealed a trace of dignity as she coldly said. Why would I need to use the Phoenix Dharma body to deal with a first-grade illusory swordsman like you? Xiaohua pulled his hand, and several thumb-sized heavenly thunder attraction techniques struck the sword flow rushing towards him. Chapter 2781. With a loud rumble, a large area of sword light was destroyed by the heavenly thunder. Xiaohua took the opportunity to fly closer to Xue Mingcha. You want to fight with this sword with just this demonic weapon of yours? Xue Mingcha understood Xiaohua's intention and unconsciously laughed. This sword will let you know the ability of a first-grade sword transformation. Buzz, a fierce sword cry resounded. Xue Mingcha's figure gradually disappeared, and a huge sword finally appeared in midair. Fight! The sword essence in Xiaohua's body suddenly accelerated as Xue Mingcha transformed into a sword. Just like how the soul execution vital light was sucked away by the sword essence felt like it was coming out of his body. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He tried his best to stabilize the sword essence. He didn't use the wishful staff anymore. His hands formed seals, and the thunderbolts and heavenly thunder fell like rain. Rumble! The continuous sound of thunder and the rising and falling lightning struck the huge sword and the surrounding sword light. However, no matter how rampant the lightning was, no matter how the heavenly thunder struck, the sword light of the huge sword was still bright, and even had a feeling of becoming more and more glorious. Is sword transformation so powerful? Xiaohua's mouth was somewhat bitter. At this moment, he already understood that a swordsman who had entered the sword transformation realm not only had an attack power that surpassed that of an ordinary nascent soul cultivator, even the body that had transformed into a sword also had an extremely strong defense. Not to mention that he was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Even if he was, without a sharp magic treasure and attack method, it would be difficult for him to take advantage of this huge sword. Buzz, along with the sword cry, the huge sword transformed by Xue Mingcha moved. The movement of sword transformation was different from the movement of an illusory sword that used a secret technique to forcibly enter sword transformation. An extremely smooth sword arc flashed, and the huge sword had already crossed the sky. Then, like an antelope hanging its horn, a strong confinement and indescribable sharpness crossed the space of more than 10 zhang and fell in front of Xiaohua. Even a feeling of being torn apart was born from Xiaohua's skin. Xiaohua had already seen this kind of sword transformation attack at Chicken Crow Mountain. Although Xue Mingcha's sword transformation was no match for the old man's sword transformation, the power behind this strike was definitely not simple. Xiaohua felt that even if there was a mountain here, this strike would be able to flatten it. However, this power and this confinement were not what made Xiaohua feel the most uncomfortable. What made Xiaohua feel the most was the sword essence around him. It was like a moth flying into a flame. This sword essence was in tune with this sword light, and it was trying to force its way forward. Forget it. Xiaohua understood in his heart that Xue Mingcha had somehow found out that he had sword origin in his body. This sword transformation attack had already taken into account his sword origin. The sword origin that he had forcefully cultivated in the sword catacomb had now become his burden. I'm going for broke. Xiaohua clenched his teeth. Wang. At the same time, a sword hum was emitted from Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua no longer suppressed his sword origin. His entire body emitted an intense brilliance, and a heart-shaped greatsword formed around Xiaohua's body. As Xiaohua forcefully transformed into a sword, the suction force of the giant sword was greatly reduced. However, Xue Mingcha's sword light was in front of him again. Xiaohua did not dare to be negligent. He waved his entire sword light and went forward to meet it. However, just as the sword light flew out, the great sword that Xue Mingcha had transformed into suddenly crossed the space of several tens of feet and appeared within the sword light. Not good. How could Xiaohua not know that this was definitely a sword transformation divine ability? At the same time that his figure hurriedly flew over, all the sword origin in his body surged out, and he was prepared to meet the great sword that Xue Mingcha had transformed into. Boom! An earth-shattering tremor resounded. The two soaring sword lights really did collide. Not only did the air wave sweep up the surroundings, even all the layers of ice on the ground were shattered by the air wave and the remnant sword light. Several tens of feet of real water waves were lifted up. Not only that, just as the two sword lights collided, Xuemingcha's great sword suddenly flashed. The great sword grew by several feet, and the great sword that Xiaohua had transformed into was completely destroyed. Xiaohua's figure was like a huge rock that was forcefully smashed into the ice lake by Xuemingcha. Furthermore, the remnant sword she even went past Xiaohua and slashed at the iceberg that Xiaohua was previously standing on. That huge iceberg was like a piece of condensed tofu, and was split into two halves. That powerful force even pressed down the iceberg by more than 2 feet, and then it floated up from the water. As for Xiaohua, his figure fell into the ice-cold lake water. His Taoist robe had long been torn to shreds, and his body that was as hard as gold and stone had many bloody scars. These bloody scars were like the mouth of a baby. Some were an inch long, and some were a foot long. All of them were filled with flesh and blood. However, although these bloody scars looked extremely serious, not a single drop of blood seeped out. The bloody light only left on the skin, and there was a faint brilliance that wrapped around it. Moreover, these wounds were also slowly shrinking and slowly recovering. However, compared to the injuries on the surface of Xiaohua's body, it seemed that the injuries on Xiaohua's body were even more serious. Xiaohua's body gently floated in the icy water, as if he was a walking corpse without feeling. In fact, it was indeed similar. Right now, his mind was violently shaking, and a kind of invisible sword cry was constantly flashing in his mind. Just now, Xuemingcha's sword strike not only hit his sword body, but also hit his sword intent and the sword heart that had yet to take shape. The damage from the sword heart directly entered his primordial spirit. Although Xiaohua's primordial spirit was already separated and independent, his body was still affected. In particular, the sword essence that was originally flowing in his body like mercury was now on the verge of being torn apart. The connection between the sword essence was faintly discernible, and even when it flowed, it was intermittent. Hugh, as if letting out a long breath, Xiaohua's tightly closed eyes moved slightly. He was not unconscious, but the feeling of being hit by the sword was really uncomfortable. It was as if the whole world had been turned upside down. His whole body involuntarily turned over and over, but unfortunately his body did not move. This feeling was really unbearable. Sword transformation, sword transformation. It's really extraordinary. This young master still underestimated sword transformation. Xiaohua resisted the tearing pain of his body and the nauseating discomfort in his mind, and secretly thought, the reason why sword transformation is because she is a sword. How arrogant was that soul-slaying primary light, but when it touched Xuemingcha's neck, it was actually unable to cut it. If I were to fight with her with the wishful staff, it would be considered as meeting force with force. But I'm also using my own unformed sword to fight with her. Isn't this like hitting a stone with an egg? In the future, I have to remember that using my own strength to overcome the enemy's weakness is the best strategy. Today's competitive spirit and hot-blooded desire to compete with the blue sky should be used less in the future. At this time, the eagerness in Xiaohua's eyes had completely disappeared and was replaced by a kind of regret. However, this regret had just flashed by, and that sharp sword intent was once again born from the surface of the lake. This guy is going to take my life today. Xiaohua sensed the sword intent and hurriedly shook his incomparably heavy head. He urged his magic power and formed a water-repelling seal, and his figure flew away. That is, just as the magic power in his body surged, a strong confining force passed through the dozens of feet of ice water and directly enveloped him. Not to mention Xiaohua. Even within this dozens of feet range, the extremely fluctuating water ripples from before also calmed down. Although this area of water was not frozen, that kind of solidity was comparable to ice. Wang Wang, the sword origin within Xiaohua's body let out a mournful wail. Outside the ice lake, a sword hum resounded once again. Following that sword hum, a seemingly illusory yet seemingly corporeal sword chi swayed as it descended. Shua! Almost ignoring the dozens of feet of ice water, that sword chi directly fell on the top of Xiao Hua's head. Seeing the sword chi chopping towards him, Xiao Hua was scared out of his wits. He did not expect the sword transformation's attack to be so fierce and its speed to be so fast. Even the water-repelling seal could not avoid the confinement of this attack. Even the meridians in his body and the golden core in his lower dantian were firmly suppressed by the confining force, and not a trace of magic power could be used. Moreover, this Xue Mingcha was not like those third-grade illusory swordsmen that Xiao Hua had met before. When she chopped down with her huge sword, the sword transformation's sword force was already contained within it. Xiao Hua was not a true nascent soul cultivator. Not to mention not releasing his pressure, even if he released it, how could he block this huge sword attack? Thinking about the various methods that Xiao Hua currently had, although there were many types and abnormal, if he really wanted to use them to fight against a sword transformation swordsman, it seemed that it would be difficult to use any of them. None of them could be compared to Xue Mingcha's sword transformation's attack. Xiao Hua, who could simultaneously kill 4 third-grade illusory swordsmen, was still somewhat delicate in front of Xue Mingcha. Therefore, at this time, Xiao Hua could no longer care about hiding anything. Weng Weng, the dragon transformation art within Xiao Hua's body was madly activated, and a kacha sound was heard. Within Xiao Hua's lower dantian, the 2 lightning cores within the silver-white golden core emitted violent lightning. These lightning bolts struck Xiao Hua's golden core, causing the entire golden core to rapidly revolve. A huge amount of true essence gushed out from the golden core, and even caused the extremely condensed heaven and earth spiritual chi near the golden core to rush out. Like a torrential flood in a mountain valley, it poured into Xiao Hua's meridians. As soon as this true essence entered Xiao Hua's meridians, it was transformed into magic power. The golden light around Xiao Hua's body flourished, and within this golden light, there were traces of lightning. Woo! A strange sound was emitted from Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua, who had already been confined by the sword transformation's power and was unable to move, was suddenly surrounded by lightning bolts. With a raise of his hand, he defeated the confining force, and his figure flashed a string of afterimages along with the lightning bolts, flying towards the surface of the water. Oh! Xue Mingcha's sword was already less than 2 zhang away from Xiao Hua. Under these circumstances, even if he was an early-stage nascent soul cultivator, Xue Mingcha was still confident that she could kill him. However, at this crucial moment, Xiao Hua actually used the lightning evasion technique and forcibly escaped from her sword light. How could this not shock Xue Mingcha? Chapter 2782. Boom! Just as Xiao Hua flew out of the confinement, it was as if a mountain ridge had fallen into an ice lake, or as if countless fireball talismans had exploded inside the ice lake. The sword shadow flashed, and a wave of several dozen feet high was raised. A space of half a mu in size appeared inside the ice lake, and in this space, Xue Mingcha's camellia-like sword quietly floated. It was as if she had always been there, and would still be there in the future. The existence of her sword pushed away all the splashes of water. So close! Xiao Hua did not have the time to comprehend the incomparable sword force of the sword transformation. After all, to push away the water of half a mu in size of the ice lake did not only rely on sword origin and sword force, but also the comprehension of the way of the sword. It was far from what Xiao Hua, who had just touched the edge of the sword transformation, could compare with. If he could stay in this sword force for a long time, it would have a crucial effect on him stepping into the sword transformation realm. Unfortunately, compared to his life, this effect was as light as a feather. Xiao Hua let out a sigh of relief in his heart. His figure strangely followed Xue Mingcha's waves and airflow, rushing out of the water at an incomparably fast speed. With a series of thunderous rumbles, Xiao Hua had already rushed out more than 100 feet. "Where do you think you're going?" A sharp sword cry sounded behind Xiao Hua, and after a series of sword shadows flashed, a 5-feet-long flying sword soared into the sky. It chased after Xiao Hua like a stream of light. The speed of that sword shadow was extremely fast, and it did not seem to be inferior to Xiaohua's Imperial Thunder transformation in the slightest. I'm going to die. Xiaohua saw that Xue Mingcha was actually chasing after him with one in front and one behind. His Imperial Thunder transformation was actually unable to gain the slightest advantage, and he unconsciously felt his soul fly out of his body. How could he dare to think about anything else? He recklessly activated the Dragon Transformation Art and the Celestial Body Empowerment Technique, while absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, while stimulating the true essence in his gold core, and using the Lightning Escape Technique, he rushed forward. Just as mentioned before, when it came to escaping, Xiaohua was really experienced. Before he had even condensed his gold core, he had already fought with Taoist Jing Ru, who was a nascent soul cultivator. However, at that time, Xiaohua simply didn't dare to let Jing Ru get close to him. He could only keep a distance of a few dozen kilometers. But this time, when he faced Xue Mingcha, who was at the first grade transformation sword stage, Xiaohua was able to retreat unscathed after a head-on collision. He should be proud of himself. What was special was that after flying for half a cup of tea's time, Xiaohua did not hesitate to change direction. The strange angle and sudden change of direction threw Xue Mingcha more than 100 zhang away. When Xue Mingcha changed direction again to pursue, Xiaohua had already flown several hundred zhang away. In the following half a day, Xiaohua made countless turns, rushed into the sky, rushed into the ground, and even plunged into the water, all in an attempt to shake off Xue Mingcha. Unfortunately, Xue Mingcha was different from Taoist Jing Si. She only maintained her sword form. Regardless of whether it was in the air, on the ground, or in the water, she was not affected by the environment at all. Damn it, this swordsman is indeed powerful. After tossing and turning for half a day, the shaking in Xiaohua's mind gradually disappeared. That nauseating feeling also disappeared. Although he couldn't escape from Xue Mingcha's pursuit, Xue Mingcha didn't attack, so his life wasn't in danger for the time being. His brain began to ponder again. This young master's thunder evasion technique can already catch up to my Imperial Thunder sect master, but I still can't shake her off. What about the nascent soul cultivators of other sects? Don't even mention them. If I really encountered this guy, wouldn't I end up dead? But then again, this young master is only several hundred zhang away from this guy. If she really wanted to kill me, I'm afraid this young master still wouldn't be able to take that sword strike from before, right? While Xiaohua was secretly astonished, Xue Mingcha's heart became even more depressed. In fact, Xiaohua's thoughts weren't completely correct. Although the flying sword of a sword cultivator was extremely fast, far faster than cultivators of the same level, compared to the thunder evasion technique of the Imperial Thunder sect, there was still a gap. An ordinary second-grade sword transformation stage swordsman might not necessarily be able to catch up to Xiaohua. Because this Xue Mingcha's flying sword was somewhat special, her flying speed was also much faster than ordinary swordsmen. This was also one of the reasons why she chased after Xiaohua from so far away. But she didn't expect Xiaohua's thunder evasion technique to be so powerful. Even if she used all of her sword origin, she still couldn't catch up to him. Now that she thought about it, Xiaohua landed on the ice mountain not because he couldn't escape, but because he was waiting for her. This kind of waiting was either to give the other 3 Foundation establishment stage swordsmen a chance to escape, or it was consistent with Xiaohua's actions. Xiaohua wanted to kill her. Thinking that Xiaohua wanted to kill a first-grade sword transformation stage swordsman like her, Xue Mingcha sneered in her heart. If it wasn't for the cultivation of a middle nascent soul stage swordsman, it would be impossible to break through her sword transformation stage defense. Otherwise, it would be impossible to talk about injuries. And in the short fight just now, Xue Mingcha had already ascertained Xiaohua's strength. He was only at the early nascent soul stage, far from being her opponent. However, even if Xiaohua wasn't Xue Mingcha's opponent, Xue Mingcha wanting to kill Xiaohua was the same as Xiaohua wanting to kill Xue Mingcha. It could only be an idea, but it couldn't be realized. Of course, Xiaohua wanted to kill Xue Mingcha, but he didn't have the strength. But if Xue Mingcha wanted to kill Xiaohua, she had the will and the strength to do so, but the timing wasn't right. Yes, Xue Mingxia was following behind Xiaohua, and her divine sense had also locked onto Xiaohua. However, her sword origin had been completely activated, and nearly 80% of it had been invested into the flight of the flying sword. Even if the remaining sword origin could be used to launch an attack, Xue Mingxia understood in her heart that as long as she launched an attack, her flying speed would definitely be slowed down. And in the process of slowing down, Xiaohua would have to fly extremely far away again. Moreover, whether Xue Mingxia's attack would be effective or not, she herself wasn't sure. Didn't she see how Xiaohua had dodged the previous head-on attack and the attack that Xue Mingxia was extremely confident in? At this time, Xue Mingxia was relying on the fact that the sword origin in her body was far superior to Xiaohua's. She was waiting for the true essence in Xiaohua's body to be exhausted. Once the true essence was exhausted, the golden core wouldn't be able to provide any magic power. Xiaohua's flying speed would slow down, and that would be the moment Xiaohua would die. This idea was naturally a wise move for a high-level swordsman like Xue Mingxia, and it was the same for Taoist Jingru in the past. However, the early nascent soul-stage Taoist Jingru couldn't catch Xiaohua decades ago. Could the current Xue Mingxia do it? After flying like a headless fly for several days, Xiaohua gradually had a plan in his heart. He also understood Xue Mingxia's difficulties. As for himself, he had the heavenly infusion technique to draw in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth from the outside world, and the dragon transformation art to refine the spiritual qi. He didn't even need to activate the golden core in his dantian. Instead, he could rely on medicinal pills and spiritual herbs to support the lightning evasion technique. Moreover, this kind of crazy activation of the technique was also a kind of test for Xiaohua's newly created technique. It was also a kind of tempering for Xiaohua's other set of meridians that hadn't fully matured yet. Xiaohua even thought of chasing after Xue Mingxia like this until his golden core realm was completely stabilized before escaping. However, when he thought of Fairy Hong Xia's concern, Xiaohua decided to take a risk. He would first shake off Xue Mingxia, then head to the place where he had agreed to meet Fairy Hong Xia in advance. After flying for another half a day, another ice lake appeared in front of him. This ice lake was very similar to the ice lake from before. Moreover, there were ripples on the surface of the lake, and there were very few icebergs. Xiaohua's heart stirred, and he suddenly plunged into the ripples. Xiaohua had used this kind of trick many times in the past few days. When Xue Mingxia's divine sense moved, she didn't even think about it. Her flying sword also turned around and chased down the ice lake. With a loud boom, Xiaohua rushed into the blue water, and in an instant, the icy water rose several zhang. The waves rushed into the air, and a string of water droplets appeared. These water droplets reflected a colorful brilliance under the clear sun. However, Xue Mingxia didn't care about this moment of beauty. Her sword flashed, and in an instant, she rushed into the blue water. However, just as she entered the water, and before the waves even fell, the divine sense that Xue Mingxia released was suddenly blocked. The divine sense mark that locked onto Xiaohua also disappeared. It was as if Xiaohua had never appeared. Xue Mingxia was greatly alarmed, and she hurriedly released her divine sense to search again. However, just as her divine sense swept out 10 zhang, she immediately felt that something was wrong. Because in her divine sense, there wasn't only icy water nearby, but there were many inexplicable things, whether it was foothills or scenery, or indescribable cultivators, or countless swordsmen, not good. When Xue Mingxia saw this, how could she not know that she had fallen into Xiaohua's trap? She hurriedly retracted her divine sense. However, when she retracted her divine sense, countless scenes flashed before her eyes. It was as if her divine sense had extended forward again. It wasn't retracting as she thought. Break, Xue Mingxia didn't dare to hesitate anymore, and hurriedly used a secret technique. However, she felt a sharp pain in her mind, and the divine sense that swept out was cut off by her. At this time, the several zhang of blue water that Xiaohua stirred up had already fallen, but the space within several zhang of Xue Mingxia was enveloped by a layer of innate primordial water that was as thin as a cicada's wing. Xue Mingxia didn't reveal her physical body, and her entire sword let out a buzzing sound. Clearly, she was extremely angry. The sword light flashed, and a sword ray mixed with angry sword chi rushed into the innate primordial water. Xue Mingke actually wanted to destroy the innate primordial water at the risk of her sword being damaged. Boom! The innate primordial water was indeed broken by Xue Mingcha, and when the innate primordial water landed on the sword, it quickly corroded the sword light like thorns, and in an instant, some parts of the sword light were annihilated. However, that wasn't all. In the gaps between the innate primordial water droplets, wisps of spiritual fire also appeared and landed on the sword light. Hiss. The sound was also extremely soft, and the sword light was actually ignited by the spiritual fire. Damn it! Xue Mingcha urged her sword origin, and tried her best to resist the corrosion of the innate primordial water. Her divine sense swept out again, and she already saw that Xiao Hua had already flown several li away. Chapter 2783. I must kill this bastard. Xue Mingcha was enraged at the thought of being injured in front of a cultivator. She cursed Xiao Hua in her heart. Just as she was about to activate her sword origin and soar into the sky again, she suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from her back. When she scanned her back with her divine perception, she found that a thumb-sized flame had already ignited the sword light on her back. Moreover, the fire seemed to be spreading. Is this the innate true fire? Xue Mingcha was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect Xiao Hua to have innate true fire in the innate true water. Moreover, this true fire could actually ignite her sword light. Since this true fire could ignite the sword light, then the sword origin must be able to ignite it as well. And could she not be ignited as well? The most important thing was that when the flame burned the sword light, there was a bone-eroding pain. This pain forced Xue Mingcha to escape from the sword transformation realm. This was something Xue Mingcha didn't dare to imagine. However, how could Xue Mingcha dare to escape from the sword transformation realm? She could only activate her sword origin. Her body glowed brightly, and the sword light pierced the bottom of the flame, stopping it from spreading further. However, the sword light was only stopped for a moment. The sword light was ignited by the flame again, and the fire grew even stronger. Xue Mingcha suddenly thought of the innate true water that trapped her just now. Without hesitation, she rushed over again, wanting to use the innate true water to extinguish the spirit fire. Unfortunately, when the innate true water landed on the spirit fire seemed to be nothing. It even ignited the innate true water. This isn't the innate true fire. Xue Mingcha was shocked. When she realized that this strange flame wasn't the innate true fire, she panicked even more. This was something that could ignite the innate true water. How could she let it wreak havoc on her body? Xue Mingcha gritted his teeth. The sword light around his body flashed again, and the huge sword appeared again. However, this huge sword only appeared for a brief moment before it quickly shrunk. A slender camellia flower emerged from the light of the huge sword. The camellia flower fell into the air, and gradually revealed the figure of a naked woman. When the sword light faded away, Xue Mingcha, who had changed into another set of purple sword equipment, appeared with an ashen face. Xue Mingcha didn't have time to check the situation at the scene and immediately released her divine perception. As expected, there was no trace of Xiao Hua within 100 miles. If it wasn't that Xiao Hua was flying too fast, then it was that Xiao Hua had used a concealment technique. But no matter what, with Xue Mingcha's ability, it was already no different from ascending to the heavens if he wanted to discover and catch up to Xiao Hua now. This bastard is too cunning. Xue Mingcha unwillingly used her divine sense to scan the area in front of her again and again. Only when she felt that she had really lost track of Xiao Hua did she fiercely retract her divine sense. At this moment, her divine sense was still somewhat painful. The sword light that Xue Mingcha shed should have disappeared a long time ago because it didn't have sword origin. However, under the attachment of the spiritual fire, it continued to burn for a while. At this moment, Xue Mingcha looked again. Not only did the sword light disappear, even the spiritual fire had turned into a tiny wisp. This wisp of spiritual fire could only be seen with the naked eye, and Xue Mingcha's divine sense couldn't detect it. This fire doesn't seem to be as powerful as I imagined. Xue Mingcha suddenly realized something, and her heart was somewhat ashamed and angry. This bastard Xiaohua is really cunning. He actually set up this thing after using the innate true water. So it was to set up a maze. And this sword actually used the golden cicada shell shedding secret technique and damaged the sword origin. But if this sword didn't use the secret technique, how could it escape from this mysterious fire? Seeing the spiritual fire slowly fall down like a thin feather, Xue Mingcha's heart moved. She clapped her hands and took out a sword-shaped container from her chest. She pointed her finger, and the small sword flew under the spiritual fire. The tip of the small sword was an entrance, and she quietly waited for the spiritual fire to enter the container. However, something strange happened. That wisp of spiritual fire didn't seem to be material at all. It actually escaped from the small sword and slowly fell into the blue waves below the small sword. What kind of fire is this? Xue Mingcha was somewhat dumbfounded. She naturally knew that there were many strange things in the Dao sect, but she was still a sword. What kind of things hadn't she seen before? However, this was the first time she saw a spiritual fire that looked even stranger than the innate true fire. After using several methods to collect the spiritual fire, Xue Mingcha completely gave up. She really didn't understand how Xiaohua kept and used this item. However, when she glanced at the innate primordial water that had shrunk into a few drops in midair, a smile appeared on Xue Mingcha's face. Fortunately, I didn't make a wasted trip this time. This sword needs innate true water to refine the sword body, and this Xiaohua actually sent a few drops. Speaking of innate true water, the matter of the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain was definitely caused by this bastard Xiaohua. Not only does this bastard have the Yin-Yang sword gourd, he also has innate true water. Where did he get it from? Sword Master Chong is really too much. He left a good innate true water and didn't let this sword take it. Now it's a mess because of that bastard. At this point, Xue Mingcha pointed her finger, and several sword lights flew out. They nimbly caught the few drops of innate true water and slowly sent them into the small sword-like container. Xue Mingcha frowned. However, what kind of elixir is Sword Master selling in his gourd? Not only did he not chase after Xiaohua, he even revealed this matter. It's as if the matter of the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain never happened. This is really troublesome. Why should this sword think about these troublesome matters? How many things are done by Sword Master's group of third-grade transformation Sword Masters? This sword doesn't need to go to the battlefield of the Great Sword War. The corner of Xue Mingcha's mouth curled up. She waved her hand and caught the small sword-like container. After carefully putting it away, she released her divine sense again and scanned the surroundings several times. Only then did her body release sword lights and soar into the sky in a certain direction, quickly disappearing. After several days, Xiaohua's figure strangely appeared in a place dozens of li away. This position was not only the direction Xiaohua had fled in, but the place was also very obvious. It was an ice mountain in the middle of an ice lake. In fact, after Xiaohua released the innate primordial water and spiritual fire, his Buddhist consciousness had been left in the ice lake. Seeing that Xue Mingcha had fallen into the innate primordial water, he immediately urged the true origin in his gold core to increase his speed. When Xue Mingcha's divine sense swept over again, he had already crossed the ice mountain. When Xue Mingcha discovered the spiritual fire, she didn't have time to follow Xiaohua. Xiaohua immediately withdrew his Buddhist consciousness and quickly flew back, hiding in the ice mountain. Xiaohua's concealment technique, the capital star array, and the maze he had set up allowed Xue Mingcha to release her divine sense between dozens of li and hundreds of li. She simply didn't sweep this ice mountain. Alas, what a pity for those few drops of innate primordial water. Xiaohua flew above the ice lake and collected the spiritual fire that had fallen into it. He whispered with some regret, however, this young master's cultivation is still a bit lacking. I originally thought that with gold core, I would be able to fight Reverend Jing Si. Looking at it now, it's better to be careful. If I can avoid that guy, it's better not to. If I really see him, it's better to run away as soon as possible. Following which, Xiaohua raised his head to look at the position of the sun. After identifying the direction slightly, he flew towards another direction. The astronomical phenomenon in the extreme north of Huan country was rather strange. In the beginning, the alternation of the sun and moon was normal. However, as one went deeper, the day and night gradually lengthened. In the end, the night and day would often not alternate for dozens of days. Now it was daytime. After Xiaohua parted ways with Fairy Hongxia and the rest, the pale white sun had been hanging in the east without any movement. Xiaohua was originally a directionally challenged person. At this moment, it was already not easy for him to identify the direction by looking at the position of the sun. However, Xiaohua was still wrong. Although the sun had been hanging in the east and didn't seem to have moved, how could it not have moved for dozens of days? If it was a sword cultivator, they would definitely calculate and see which direction the sun was in. Then, they would fly towards the place they wanted to go. Furthermore, the other party would have other methods to determine the direction better. They would definitely not use the direction of the sun from dozens of days ago as the direction of today. Therefore, Xiaohua's flight was naturally different from the direction Fairy Hongxia and the rest were heading towards. Xiaohua flew for several days and didn't see any trace of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. However, he wasn't in a hurry. After all, he was fighting with Xue Mingcha and flew extremely far away. Fairy Hongxia and the rest shouldn't be flying too close. However, after flying for dozens of days, seeing that the sun in the east was gradually setting, Xiaohua muttered in his heart. Could it be? I was wrong again? Even if the three of them were rushing nonstop, with eyes escape technique, I should have found them long ago. Xiaohua originally wanted to find a swordsman to ask about the location Fairy Hongxia mentioned before they left. However, in these dozens of days, he actually didn't meet a single person. I've really seen a ghost. Xiaohua thought helplessly. Previously, I didn't want to meet any sword cultivators. However, there were dozens of them. They were dozens of illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen who didn't care about their lives and sent themselves to death. They even sent an old woman who was a grade 1 swordsman. They almost took this young master's life. Now, there's no need for any illusory sword cultivators. Can't any of them come out? Xiaohua helplessly flew in midair and released his spiritual will and Buddhist awareness, hoping to find one or two figures so that he could find traces of Fairy Hongxia and the rest. Back then, when Fairy Hongxia and the rest were forced to part ways with Xiaohua, they fled into the distance. Especially when Fairy Hongxia's spiritual will was near Xiaohua and was forced back by Xue Mingcha's spiritual will. Although she didn't suffer any injuries, that sharp sword-like spiritual will left a deep impression on Fairy Hongxia. Chapter 2784. Furthermore, after Fairy Hongxia and the rest had flown more than 10 li away, Xue Mingcha's spiritual sense still chased after them. That spiritual sense scanned the three of them coldly, and even scanned Li Zongbao many times. However, after Xiaohua flew far away, Xue Mingcha did not dare to stay for long, and only then did he retract his spiritual sense. Seeing this, Li Zongbao understood that Xue Mingcha's intentions were different from those illusory swordsmen. He was not here to snatch the divine sword's secret manual, but to find trouble with them. Li Zongbao thought of this, so did Fairy Hongxia and Xiaomao. Fairy Hongxia was even more worried about Xiaohua. Although she knew that he already had the strength of an early nascent soul stage, but he was facing an illusory sword after all. Unknowingly, Fairy Hongxia's flying speed slowed down. Seeing this, Xiaomao looked at Li Zongbao, whose face was as cold as ice, and could only fly to Fairy Hongxia and whisper, "Senior sister. Big brother's cultivation. I don't know, but how could senior sister not know? He could easily kill 4 illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. If he really met an illusory sword, he might not be at a disadvantage." Sigh. Fairy Hongxia knew that Xiaomao's words were reasonable, but she was still worried. She sighed and did not say anything, and turned back to look in the direction that Xiao Hua disappeared. Xiao Mao wanted to say something, but seeing Fairy Hong Xia's absent-minded look, he did not know how to comfort her. Junior sister. Li Zongbao's voice entered their ears. Even if you look back a million times, you still can't see Xiao Hua. Even if you think about it a million times, you still can't help Xiao Hua. What you need to do now is to raise your cultivation. Only when you are pregnant and become a grandmaster can you be Xiao Hua's assistant. Only then can you be qualified to worry about Xiao Hua. Saying this, Li Zongbao clapped his hands and took out his beloved immortal slaughtering whip. He said in a calm and even somewhat jealous voice, "Look at this spiritual weapon, immortal slaughtering whip. Although I have never seen a spiritual weapon before, I can clearly feel that this item is mine, and mine is this item. This feeling is many times stronger than the immortal piercing whip. If this item is not a spiritual weapon, then what kind of treasure is it? Xiao Hua, who can even refine such a spiritual weapon? If you don't raise your cultivation, how can you stand shoulder to shoulder with him? Don't you see that Imperial Thunder Sect disciple called Xue Xue? Although she has something to do with Xiao Hua, she has only been cultivating in seclusion. Even when Xiao Hua went to Sky Patrol City to fight, she didn't come out to send him off. Do you think she doesn't want to? She did that for the sake of the future, for the sake of being together with Xiao Hua better. Junior sister's current cultivation can't even be compared to me. Even if you can fly to Xiao Hua's side, what can you help her with? The reason why you came all the way to Meng Mountains is to look for an opportunity. Xiao Hua lured away the transformation sword. Didn't he also want you to fulfill your wish? Now that you've lost your soul and are worried about Xiao Hua, what should you do? If you were Xue Xue of the converted Thunder Palace, I'm afraid you would have already accompanied Xiao Hualai in his Dao sword battle, right? Not only are you unable to cultivate in seclusion by yourself, you're even being protected by Xiao Hua. Moreover, there's an even greater possibility that you'll perish in the great battle between Dao cultivators. How could you still have the carefree life of Xiao Hua? Sometimes, when you lose something, you know how precious it is, Li Zongbao sighed. His words were obviously meant to provoke her, and Fairy Hong Xia understood it when she heard it. However, when Xue Xue was mentioned, Fairy Hong Xia's competitive spirit was uncontrollably born. She cupped her fists and said, "Thank you, senior brother. I understand now. I'll definitely keep senior brother's words in my heart." Actually, with Xiao Hua's cultivation base, he'll definitely be the brightest star in the great battle between Dao cultivators. However, he's been hiding it all this time. He must have his own secrets and difficulties. Therefore, in the future, in my opinion, the two of you will spend less time together and more time apart. If the two of you are of the same mind, then you should have the mentality of seeing the world as close as a stone's throw away. Junior sister's mentality right now is not good. Yes, junior sister understands. Fairy Hong Xia nodded again. Moreover, Xiao Hua, in my opinion, his other divine abilities might not be able to catch the eyes of sword transformation. However, his ability to escape is definitely at the level of a mid-late nascent soul cultivator. Sword transformation may not be able to catch up with him. You don't have to worry today, and you don't have to worry in the future as well. We just have to hurry to mount millions of Meng Mountains. I'm sure it won't be long before he catches up with us. Yes, junior sister understands. After hearing Li Zongbao's words, Fairy Hong Xia was still a little worried. However, she also understood that Li Zongbao's words were true. She was simply worried about Xiao Hua, and that was the inferior choice. Only by increasing her own cultivation base and not worrying Xiao Hua, and being able to help him, that would be the superior choice. It's better to forget each other in the pugilistic world than to help each other in times of need. I'm afraid this is what it means. Fairy Hong Xia suddenly thought to herself. Seeing Fairy Hong Xia's thoughtful expression, Li Zongbao did not say much. This kind of thing would have to depend on Fairy Hong Xia's own understanding. The only thing he could do was to remind her. After flying for another 10 days, Xiao Hua still did not appear. As a result, Fairy Hong Xia was not the only one feeling uneasy. Even Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were surprised. Unfortunately, before they could stop and wait, a third-grade illusory sword divine sense swept over from the front. As soon as it discovered them, it immediately locked onto them. Without Xiao Mao, the highest cultivation base among the three was only at the late foundation establishment stage. Moreover, Li Zongbao's immortal slaying whip was still being nourished and could not be used. The three of them were no match for any illusory swordsman, let alone a third-grade illusory swordsman. Sensing this divine sense, Li Zongbao's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly pointed behind and said, "Quick, we don't have to go forward anymore. Let's turn back quickly. If we can meet Xiaohua, it's fine. If not..." Without waiting for Li Zongbao to finish his words, Xiao Mao immediately turned the flowing cloud airship around, activated all the spiritual power in his body, and flew in the direction where the three of them came from. Li Zongbao was right, but he forgot that Xiaohua was the best at getting lost. Even if they flew to the place where the four of them separated, how could they find Xiaohua again? Moreover, would the third-grade illusory swordsman give them a chance to meet up with Xiaohua? The flowing cloud airship had only flown for half a day when Li Zongbao's divine sense discovered the dark-faced sword cultivator chasing after the airship. Not only that, when Li Zongbao sensed that the swordsman was approaching him, another 5 strands of divine thoughts swept over from the direction where the swordsman came from. After discovering the airboat, the 5 strands of divine thoughts disappeared again. When the divine thoughts swept over the airboat again, Li Zongbao found that the 6 swordsmen of grade 3 illusory sword had surrounded the airboat and were closing in on it in a fan-shaped formation. Maybe we really can't fly back. Li Zongbao retracted his divine sense, and his face was extremely ugly. He pointed at the 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen and said, "These 6 illusory swordsmen are obviously afraid of junior brother Xiao. They also saw our intention to fly back, and now they have surrounded us, blocking our way from the side. The 3 swordsmen who are flying side by side with the airship are obviously flying very fast. They are chasing after the airship and outflanking us from the side. It seems that they are trying to stop us from flying back." Xiao Mao's divine sense was far superior to that of ordinary cultivators. At this time, he also realized that something was wrong, and his face was also pale. Fairy Hongxia knew that her divine sense was not as good as Li Zongbao's, so she did not release her divine sense. Instead, she said calmly, "Since we can't fly back, then we can only fly in the direction away from them. As long as we can keep a distance from them, let's go." Li Zongbao's body flashed brilliantly, and he poured his magic power into the flowing cloud airship. The flowing cloud airship accelerated again and flew in another direction. Although Li Zongbao and the others tried their best, and the airship kept changing its direction, the 3 of them were, after all, just cultivators of the foundation establishment stage. Under the pursuit of 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen, they were still unable to catch up. In just a few days, the 6 swordsmen's figures were already in sight. In fact, according to the speed of the 6 swordsmen, they could have caught up with the airship 2 or 3 days ago. But for some reason, perhaps they thought that the 3 of them were like turtles in a jar, so they slowed down their speed. Seeing that the 6 swordsmen were only 2 or 3 miles away, Li Zongbao sighed softly in his heart. The 3 of them were really insignificant without Xiaohua. He looked up at the direction where Xiaohua should have come from, clapped his hands, and took out the immortal slaying whip. He whispered, "Junior sister, let's meet the enemy." But Fairy Hongxia hesitated for a moment, and then withdrew her hand from the control of the airship. She said, "Senior brother, it's better not to use the immortal slaying whip now." But Li Zongbao frowned slightly. This item, although it's a spiritual weapon, it's currently being cultivated, so it can't be used as a spiritual weapon. Moreover, if senior brother rashly uses it, the illusory swordsman might notice that something is wrong and covet it. Even if they won't really kill us now, and maybe take us as hostages, with this item, we might not be able to keep our lives. Oh, Li Zongbao nodded slightly. He didn't have any suitable magic weapons, so the first thing he thought of was the immortal slaying whip. Hearing Fairy Hongxia's words, he knew that she was right. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and kept the immortal slaying whip, and took out the yin yang ring. He turned to Xiao Mao and said, "Junior brother Xiao, you guard this airship. There's no need to fight. We won't leave this airship either. Our main goal is to escape." "Yes, junior brother understands." Xiao Mao had originally stood up, but now he could only sit down. There are only 3 little kids here. Where's the horrifying phoenix?" A fierce voice came from the horizon. It was the grade 3 illusory swordsman who had first discovered the airship. Following that, a voice that was neither loud nor soft said coldly, "Left sword. Who cares where the horrifying phoenix went? Capture these 3 kids. Aren't you afraid that the horrifying phoenix won't show up?" Chapter 2785. Li Zongbao looked around and saw that the voice belonged to the only female swordsman among the 6 swordsmen. She was also the fastest and was less than a mile away from the flying boat. "Huang Ping, we've already searched the surrounding several hundred miles, but we didn't find any trace of the terrifying phoenix. Furthermore, these 3 brats are actually behind us on the flying boat. Could it be that we have already caught up to it? That terrifying phoenix escaped somewhere else?" "Why are you asking me?" Huang Ping said calmly. "Let's capture these 3 and interrogate them carefully." "Leave the interrogation to this old man." Another valiant sword cultivator approached and sneered, "My High Wind Sword sect has a grudge with this Dao sect cultivator. The reason why I interrogated the 3 Dao cultivator disciples who fought in the battle was to vent the anger of the fallen disciples of the sword region." "Wang Jingqiang, your methods are too ruthless. Let me do it." On the other side, a scholarly-looking swordsman said eerily, "This chick won't be able to withstand your vicious attacks. It would be a pity if she were to fall." Fairy Hong Xia's expression changed when she heard that, even though she knew that they were just trying to scare her. "Attack!" Li Zongbao had been holding back for a long time. When he saw the 4 swordsmen approaching while the other 2 were still some distance away, he shouted and threw out the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop was a dharma treasure used by Heng Zhao in his early years, so it was quite powerful. As the yin-yang hoop flew out, 2 rays of red and green light flew out from the hoop, transforming into 2 rings that shot towards Zuojian, who was closest to the flying boat. "Hee, I haven't made a move all this time because I feel like I'm bullying the younger generation. But now, you dare to provoke me first. Then I won't hold back." As Zuojian laughed, he waved his hand and a silver-white sword light shot out from his left hand. The moment the sword light entered the air, it immediately turned into specks of stars. Each speck was a dazzling sword light, and these specks of stars descended on the green and red rings. Clap, 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 like cold water falling into a hot pot, every bit of sword light that fell on the ring emitted a strong brilliance and sword chi. That huge impact force shattered the ring. When the green and red rings disappeared, the remaining starry sword essence suddenly gathered together with the sword technique of the left sword, turning into a full moon that rushed straight toward the yin and yang ring in midair. "Oh no!" The genuine essence around Li Zongbao trembled violently, apparently affected by the backlash of the yin-yang hoop. As he cried out involuntarily, he hurriedly activated the yin-yang hoop. With a loud boom, the moon-like sword essence hit the center of the yin-yang hoop. The yin-yang hoop flashed with a strong green-red brilliance to resist, but the green-red brilliance was too inferior to the full moon sword essence and almost collapsed upon contact. The brilliance of the yin-yang hoop faded, and it was sent flying into the air by the fierce sword chi. The sharp sword essence once again transformed into a meteor and shot towards the flying boat. The gap between the late Foundation establishment stage and the third-grade illusory sword was so huge. Fairy Hong Xia was helpless. She raised her shoulders and an ice phoenix celestial body flew out. A phoenix cry resounded in the air. "Hee, this is a female phoenix." When Zuojian saw Fairy Hong Xia's ice phoenix celestial body, his eyes narrowed into slits. "If we capture her, we won't have to worry about the terrifying phoenix handing over the divine sword's secret manual obediently." Woo, the ice phoenix spread its wings, and a hurricane blew out from between its wings. The wind blades that could blow boulders into the air were a joke in the eyes of the third-grade illusory swordsman. Sword radiance of different colors flashed around them, and they easily blocked the wind blades. Even the sword essence that flew close to them was not affected by the wind blades. Whoosh, the ice phoenix celestial body opened its mouth, and a thin layer of primordial water was spat out, blocking the sword essence. Tut tut tut. With a muffled sound, the sword essence rushed into the thin layer of primordial water, and disappeared after a slight ripple. Primordial water? As soon as Zhujian's divine will came into contact with the primordial water, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He quickly retracted his divine will and was overjoyed. Fellow swordsman, I was the first to discover this primordial water. I have the right to claim it first. As he spoke, Zhujian pointed his finger again, and a sword essence that looked like fireworks flew out again, turning into a nebula and rushing towards the primordial water. Everyone who saw it has a share. Wang Jingqiang and the others had covetous looks in their eyes. One of them had a sword essence that looked like a mountain, while the other had a sword essence that looked like a mountain flower. Both of them flew out first, and attacked the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Fairy Hong Xia's Ice Phoenix celestial body was huge, and it covered the space around her for hundreds of feet. However, her celestial body was not like Xiao Hua's Phoenix celestial body. It had the ability to control lightning, and could attack freely. It could only provide some benefits to Fairy Hong Xia in terms of controlling her skill. If she released it, it would naturally be a target for the others. She was also indebted to the two third-grade illusory swordsmen for thinking highly of her and attacking her together. Rumble! Two loud sounds rang out, and the Ice Phoenix celestial body flashed violently under the attack of the two sword essences. Although Fairy Hong Xia controlled her celestial body to dodge, and the two illusory swords did not attack too deliberately, she could not help but cry out in pain. More than half of her Ice Phoenix celestial body was torn apart by the sword essence. And this was very different from the injuries she suffered in the Battle of the Sword Tomb. In the illusory sword's sword essence, each sword essence was an individual flying sword. Fairy Hong Xia's Ice Phoenix celestial body was hit by thousands of flying swords, and every detail of her celestial body was destroyed. It was not something that could be recovered with simple recuperation. Fairy Hong Xia could not hold on any longer. She fell onto the flying boat, and the Ice Phoenix celestial body was absorbed back into her body. Fortunately, although the Ice Phoenix celestial body was absorbed, the primordial water was still outside the flying boat. Of course, the primordial water was not in a good state. The sword essence from Zhujian had rushed into the primordial water, and it was riddled with holes. It seemed like the primordial water would be destroyed with just a few more sword essences. Sigh, if my dear Xiao was here, the primordial water would not be in such a sorry state. Fairy Hong Xia tried her best to control the primordial water, and thought to herself, although the primordial water is powerful, my cultivation is too weak, and I can't unleash the full power of the primordial water. Forget it. Success or failure depends on this battle. With that thought, Fairy Hong Xia clenched her teeth, and a stream of water flew out. It was the primordial water from the tidal bead. This primordial water merged with the primordial water from before, and covered the entire flying boat. So there is so much primordial water. This old man and the rest will not be left empty-handed. At this moment, the other two illusory swords had also flown close. Seeing that Fairy Hong Xia had taken out so much primordial water, they laughed. Since they knew that each of them would get a share of the primordial water, Zhujian and the rest naturally weakened their attacks. But at this moment, a loud roar came from the flying boat, from the primordial water. Shameless scoundrels. 6 illusory swords besieging 3 foundation establishment stage cultivators. Even if you want the primordial water, you have to ask for my immortal slaying whip. Then, from the gap of the primordial water, a row of yellow whip shadows flew out. This row of whip shadows formed 6, and each of them smashed towards the 6 illusory swordsmen. Isn't this Li Zongbao, who was extremely famous in the Taoist sword war? How can the immortal piercing whip of the Utopia faction be a match for me? Wang Jingqiang was a swordsman from the Ling Feng sword sect. Naturally, he knew the situation of the Taoist sword war very well. Seeing the whip shadows approaching him, he laughed and pointed his finger casually. A sword light turned into a mountain peak, blocking the whip shadows. Unexpectedly, the moment the whip shadow came into contact with the mountain peak's sword intent, the whip shadow suddenly twisted like a spirit snake and penetrated the gap between the mountain peak's sword intent. It suddenly penetrated the sword intent and struck directly in front of Wang Jingqiang's eyes. Ouch! Every day, Wang Jingqiang saw the sound of magic weapons colliding with the sword will. When he saw the whip shadows forcibly bypassing the sword will, he was even more surprised. However, at the same time, he shrugged his shoulders casually. The sword light on his body turned into dozens of sword lights, blocking the whip shadows. This time, Wang Jingqiang was naturally careful. He didn't dare to be careless. The whip shadow actually lingered in front of the sword light for a moment, as if it was pondering. Although the yellow light on the whip shadow shone brightly, it suddenly struck towards a certain part of the sword light. Oh no! Wang Jingqiang did not care about it at first. However, when the whip shadows fell on the sword lights, an unstoppable force was generated, and the sword lights collapsed. Wang Jingqiang turned pale with fright, not only because of the power of the whip shadows, but also because the place where the whip shadows hit was a flaw in the sword lights. When the whip shadows hit that spot, the sword lights were all destroyed. Boom! The sword lights around Wang Jingqiang shone brightly. His figure flashed, but the whip shadows still hit him before they dissipated. Although the whip shadows did not have much power on him, but Wang Jingqiang's face turned red. Not to mention that Li Zongbao was fighting against 6 people. Even if he was fighting against Wang Jingqiang alone, it would be a fierce slap to Wang Jingqiang's face if the whip hit him. Wang Jingqiang was a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman whose cultivation was higher than Li Zongbao's master. There's something wrong with the immortal piercing whip. Instantly, Wang Jingqiang understood that Li Zongbao's cultivation could not have increased so much in such a short time. Looking at Zhujian and the others, the 5 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen were all hit by the whip, and they all looked extremely embarrassed. At the same time, there was a trace of fanaticism in their eyes. However, the whole scene was somewhat stagnant. Even when Xiao Mao urged the flowing cloud airship, which was wrapped in innate primordial water, to escape through the gap between the 6 people, the 6 people did not stop him. It was as if they did not see him at all. Zhujian's idea was not inferior to Wang Jingqiang's. He saw that everyone was a little afraid of each other. Some of the previous agreements had changed because of the appearance of the innate primordial water and the immortal piercing whip. Moreover, for some reason, no one wanted to be the first to face Li Zongbao. He could only wave his hand and fly up first, chasing after the flowing cloud airship at a speed that was not too fast. Chapter 2786. Yes, Li Zongbao was able to hit each of the 6 illusory swords. If he really used the immortal piercing whip on one of the illusory swords, then what would happen? If there was only one illusory sword, it would be fine. But now, there were 6 of them. Who could guarantee that the others would not spread the news? If that happened, the one who was hit by the immortal piercing whip would lose a lot of face. Although the illusory swordsmen were criticizing the Taoist sect cultivators for being sanctimonious, when it came to their face, they had to be mindful of it. After all, they were illusory sword grade 3 swordsmen. Seeing Zhujian flying away, Wang Jingqiang and the rest looked at each other and did not dare to delay. Like before, they fanned out and chased after him. While they were chasing, they were also communicating with each other, as if they were discussing something. Unfortunately, after chasing for half a day, the 6 of them did not increase their speed. Even though the flowing cloud airship did not hide like Xiaohua, they still maintained a certain distance from the airship. After all, the immortal piercing whip was not comparable to the innate primordial water or the divine sword mystic technique. There was only one of it. Whoever made the first move would get it. But who would make the first move? This was a bigger problem than the immortal piercing whip. Furthermore, the flowing cloud flying ship could not escape from their grasp. Even if they chased after Xiaohua like this, they could still fish him out. They could only focus on maintaining the current situation. The flowing cloud airship was covered by the innate primordial water, so the 6 illusory swordsmen could not see the situation on the airship. Among the 3 of them, besides Xiao Mao, Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both injured. Not to mention Fairy Hongxia, her phoenix celestial body was destroyed by the 2 illusory swords and her bloodline was severely damaged. Not to mention using her dermic powers to cast spells, it was not easy for her to even sit cross-legged on the airship. Looking at Li Zongbao, he was also sitting there listlessly. His face was pale and his dermic powers were exhausted. Senior brother. Fairy Hongxia tried her best to activate her dermic body and maintain the innate primordial water to defend against the attacks of the illusory swords. She said weakly, "Your immortal slaying whip is not complete yet. Why do you have to use it?" "If I don't use it today, when will I?" Li Zongbao replied indifferently. "Do you want me to fall before you use it?" Then he looked at the immortal slaying whip in his hand and smirked. "But this thing is really impressive. With my magic power, I can only use it once. If these illusory swords knew about this, I wonder what they would think. It's a spiritual weapon after all. How can an ordinary magic treasure compare to the amount of magic power it requires?" Xiao Mao also sighed and said, "Moreover, Senior Brother Li is forcefully activating an incomplete spirit artifact. I'm afraid that it will cause some damage to this spirit artifact, right?" Li Zongbao's mind was connected to the spiritual artifact, so he could naturally sense the wild and violent nature of the spiritual artifact that had not been completely nurtured. However, he glanced at Xiao Mao and did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Where are those illusory swords? Why haven't they attacked after such a long time?" "They are only following outside the flying ship. They did not attack. They did not even close the distance," Fairy Hongxia said in a low voice. "A bunch of greedy old farts." Li Zongbao understood immediately. He snorted and said, "They must be thinking of a way to take away my immortal slaying whip." Fairy Hongxia was stunned for a moment. Then she understood and smiled bitterly in her heart. She did not expect that Li Zongbao's rash use of the immortal slaying whip would cause the 6 illusory swords to be suspicious of each other, resulting in a stalemate. It saved the 3 of them from dying on the spot. "This stalemate will not last long," Fairy Hongxia said in a low voice. Let's hold on for as long as we can." Li Zongbao said calmly, "As for our countermeasure, I'm afraid we can only rely on Xiao Mao to activate the flying ship." "Sigh, that's true." Fairy Hongxia had already predicted this trip to Mount Million Meng. However, she did not expect that they would end up like this before they could even reach the border of Mount Million Meng. Therefore, she also understood why no one from the Kai family of Qin Yang had been able to go to Mount Million Meng and find the ancestral shrine of the Kai family. Unknowingly, a few days had passed. Xiao Mao, who had been controlling the flying ship, could not hold on any longer. On the other hand, Fairy Hongxia and Li Zongbao's injuries had recovered somewhat. This was because with the protection of the innate primordial water, Fairy Hongxia's empty fort strategy had not changed. Zhujian and the rest had seen through it. However, Zhujian and the rest were patient. The 6 of them discussed for a while and had come to a temporary conclusion. Xiang Mufeng of the Drifting Cloud Sword Manor activated his sword radiance and caught up with the flying ship. With a wave of his hand, a cloud-like sword will rushed out and entered the innate primordial water. With a loud bang, a series of ripples appeared on the innate primordial water that was flowing peacefully. Then, a crack appeared on the primordial water, and a yellow shadow of a whip flew out. Xiang Mufeng's face lit up with joy. The sword radiance around him shone brightly. Thousands of small swords shimmering in white light surrounded him like wisps of smoke. With a muffled sound, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip landed on the sword shadow. It was very faint and did not make any special sound. "Oh!" Xiang Mufeng was a little stunned. He thought to himself, could it be, just as Zhujian said, that the Dharma power consumed by this magic treasure is not something that a foundation-building cultivator can support? Is Li Zongbao only strong on the outside but weak on the inside? However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, there was a loud roar that sounded like the roar of a dragon or a tiger. The shadow of the whip that landed on the sword radiance suddenly seemed to have come to life. The shadow of the whip suddenly expanded and even twisted like a yellow python and plunged into the shadow of the sword. The head of the shadow of the whip directly hit Xiang Mufeng's sword armor. The tail of the shadow of the whip even smashed the shadow of the sword into pieces. Oh no! When Xiang Mufeng saw that the shadow of the whip was close to him, he did not dare to hesitate anymore. The sword origin in his body quickly flowed out. His entire body gradually became transparent, and a giant sword appeared. Boom! As soon as the giant sword appeared, the shadow of the immortal slaying whip hit the giant sword. The sword radiance on the giant sword flickered slightly, and the shadow of the whip was smashed into pieces and fell into the air. Buzz! The giant sword made a slight sound, and Xiang Mufeng slowly returned to his human form. However, there was a hint of seriousness on his face. He was not as happy as he was when he blocked the immortal slaying whip. Fellow swordsman Xiang, how is it? The power of this immortal slaying whip. Zhujian flew over from behind and asked loudly. That's right. It is indeed a supreme-grade magic treasure. Xiang Mufeng nodded and said, it even has the meaning of a legendary spiritual artifact. The shadow of the immortal slaying whip can actually identify the flaws in my sword will. If this magic treasure does not have a spirit, then Li Zongbao would be able to see through it. This Li Zongbao is also quite a character. Zhujian said calmly as he raised his head and looked at the flying ship that was escaping in a panic. That's right. After all, the three of them were heroes in the Great War of Dao and Sword. If they did not have some tricks up their sleeves, how would they dare to come to my sword realm to train? Wang Zhengqiang said coldly, moreover, that terrifying phoenix, which is even more powerful, actually colluded with the three of them to attack my sword realm illusory sword. If we don't kill them here, where will our dignity go? But it's been so many days, and that terrifying phoenix still hasn't shown up. Pu Qingfeng of the Flat Mountain Sword School also said somewhat anxiously, junior brother Sikong Yu of my humble sect died at his hands. If I don't kill Xiaohua, I'm afraid I won't have the face to return to the mountains and become a senior of the Flat Mountain Sword School. Since things have come to this, there's no need for us to say anything more. Zhou Zhou of the Thousand Leaves Sword Sect gritted his teeth and said, let's just kill him. As for who will take the immortal slaying whip, it won't be too late to decide after Li Zongbao dies. Looks like that's the only way. Zhujian smiled bitterly. The six of them had discussed this matter many times, but no one was satisfied with the result. If other sword friends come, it'll be even harder to deal with them. We'll do as you say, sword friend Zhua. Huang Ping of the Lunar Sun Sword Sect raised her eyes and looked at the towering and dangerous peak several dozen li away from the flying boat. She said, this sword will head to the sword peak and intercept the flying boat from the front. Let's settle this matter there. Good, we'll do as you say, sword friend Huang. Zhujian looked at everyone. Wang Zhengqiang and the others nodded, so he clapped his hands and said, as for who the immortal slaying whip belongs to, we can discuss it after these three die. Since everyone had come to an agreement, they all stepped on their flying swords and flew towards the flowing cloud-flying ship, not showing any mercy. It seemed like they wanted to kill the three of them here, not to mention that Fairy Hongxia had already fallen into a dangerous situation and was about to be killed by 6 grade 3 illusory swordsmen on the sword arrowhead peak. The lost Xiaohua was like a headless fly, flying in all directions, trying to find a sword cultivator to ask for directions. However, after flying for a long time, Xiaohua did not notice that the scenery around him had already changed. The ice field that was everywhere had gradually become less and more ripples appeared. The icebergs above the ripples had also become much smaller. Although there was no green vegetation, gray nameless thorns appeared in his field of vision. Although there were not many of these thorns, they still changed the pure white color of the ice field. Damn it, can someone come out? Xiao Hua scratched his ears and cheeks, constantly releasing his divine sense to search. At the same time, he thought anxiously, hasn't my luck always been excellent? But just as this thought appeared in his mind, he was dumbfounded. He could not help but be dumbfounded. About 100 kilometers in front of him, he scanned with his divine sense and saw a swordsman. However, it was not just one swordsman, but many. So many that when Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense, he could not see how many there were. Are these sword cultivators here to kill me? This was the first thought that came to Xiao Hua's mind. However, when Xiao Hua switched to using his Buddhist sense and secretly peeked, he found that these swordsmen had their backs facing him. Moreover, there was a faint fluctuation of sword light in front of the swordsmen, like a sword array. It seemed like they were hiding their tracks. There was no sign of them chasing after him. Chapter 2787. Moreover, most of these swordsmen were disciples of the drawing sword sect. Only a small portion of them were disciples of the first or second grade of the illusory sword sect. How could they be here to kill him? This is strange. What are these swordsmen doing? Since I have to find someone to ask, I might as well go and take a look. Xiao Hua thought. His eyes turned, and he withdrew the Imperial Thunder Transformation's lightning escape technique. He quietly changed it to wind escape technique, and used the Devil Realm's concealment technique to stealthily approach those ambushing sword cultivators. However, before he could get close to those swordsmen, he saw that the swordsmen's bodies suddenly flashed with sword light. They all flew out from their hiding places and flew up into the sky like a swarm of locusts. Damn it, I'm afraid there are tens of thousands of people. Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbstruck. They are fighting against my Dao sect cultivators? My Dao sect cultivators, when did they advance to this place? When Xiao Hua sensed the scene, he unconsciously stood in the air. His eyes stared straight ahead and he muttered, my goodness, why are there so many people? Who should I ask for directions? Of course, right in front of Xiao Hua, there was a large plain. Although the plain was covered in snow, it was already different from the rest of Huan country. The snow was not frozen solid. Instead, it was similar to the snow that Xiao Hua had seen before. It was somewhat like cotton wool, fluffy and piled up on the ground. When one stepped on it, mud and snow would definitely splash up. It was no longer the solid ice of Huan country. Looking at the snowy plain again, there were actually two groups of people preparing to fight to the death. The ones closest to Xiao Hua, needless to say, were the tens of thousands of swordsmen who were lying in ambush just now. However, the ones confronting these tens of thousands of swordsmen were not the Dao sect cultivators that Xiao Hua had imagined. Instead, it was a group of people who not only dressed strangely, but also had a somewhat different appearance. These people who made Xiao Hua dumbfounded, there were probably tens of thousands of them. These people were all dark, thin, and short. Every one of them had strange patterns engraved on their bodies. Some of these patterns were like beasts, some were like birds, and some were like ferocious ghost faces and white ghastly holes. Looking at the attire of these people, it could be said that there were all kinds of strange things. Some only used some leaves to wrap around their waists, some used vines to wrap around their necks, and some even used something that looked like leaves to wrap around their heads. In short, none of them were wearing proper clothes, and none of them were wearing a complete robe. Looking at the hands of these people, they didn't have any flying swords, nor did they have any artifacts or treasures that Xiao Hua was familiar with. However, they weren't empty-handed either. Some of them were holding long white bones that had been polished until they were shiny and sharp. Some of them were holding several human skulls that were strung together. Each skull was painted with a strange color. There were even some people who were holding pieces of wood that had been carved. Some looked like snakes, while others looked like toads. These dark, thin people holding strange weapons were not standing on the ground, nor were they floating in the air. Instead, they were riding on the backs of strange spirit beasts. These spirit beasts were of different sizes. The The small ones were about half a zhang in size, with jagged bones and flesh, and the big ones were several zhang in size, with huge bodies. However, no matter the size of the spirit beasts, each and every one of them was abnormally fierce. Each and every one of them roared with all their strength in place. If not for the restraints of the masters on their backs, they would have already rushed out. At this time, the sword cultivator had already flown into the air. With a flash of sword light, he had already launched an attack. But these dark, thin people did not seem to care at all, coldly watching. When they were about 100 zhang away from them, a strange sound came from somewhere among them. This sound was like the cry of cicadas, but also like the hiss of beasts, piercing straight into the horizon. Boom, boom. As soon as the sound was heard, all the spirit beasts began to run. The loud noise immediately drowned out the sound of the command. The entire ground began to shake. The snow and mud mixed together and splashed high into the air. Wah wah wah. A similarly strange sound came from the mouths of the people on the spirit beasts. This sound had a strange rhythm. These people, are they stupid? Xiaohua stood blankly in the air, still muttering in a low voice, as if he had not woken up from the shock just now. They don't have any magic tools or flying swords. How can they fight against the sword cultivators who are attacking that side? But obviously, these dark, thin people were not idiots. Even the several tens of thousands of sword cultivators were somewhat afraid of these strange people riding on the backs of spirit beasts. The swordsmen did not want to form a sword formation like the cultivators, but rather arrange themselves in a neat formation, attacking from three sides. Not a single swordsman stepped out of the formation. Buzz buzz, the flying swords of the several tens of thousands of swordsmen could not be underestimated. The sword lights were almost connected into one, like the rising tide of the sea, slowly and courageously rushing toward the tide of spirit beasts. Woo! Wei woo! A strange sound with an obscure rhythm rang out. In the tide of spirit beasts, the several tens of thousands of dark, thin people opened their mouths at the same time. This sound was noisy at first, like the buzzing of bees, but then it gradually echoed, as if the same person was singing. Finally, just before the swordsmen came into contact with them, layers of faint green brilliance emerged from the tide of spirit beasts. Soul cultivators. These are soul cultivators. Seeing this scene, how could Xiaohua, who practiced soul cultivation techniques, not see it? These several tens of thousands of dark, thin people were none other than the mysterious soul cultivators of Meng Mountain. Why did they run into the Hung country? To fight against sword cultivators? Although Xiaohua had made countless guesses about the appearance of soul cultivators, and even imagined many scenarios of meeting soul cultivators, he did not expect this kind of soul cultivator to be like this. How could he ever have guessed that soul cultivators would be like this? Furthermore, he had encountered soul cultivators much earlier than he had expected. While Xiaohua was still in shock, the beast tide of soul cultivators had already collided with the sword cultivators. The faint green brilliance caused by the chanting of soul cultivators grew thicker and thicker. Like strands of tentacles, it penetrated deep into the sword formation of the sword cultivators. When the sword cultivators touched the faint green brilliance, the sword lights on their bodies were annihilated, and they fell from the sky with their eyes closed. When their corpses fell to the ground, many of them were trampled by the spirit beasts of soul cultivators. Some of them had their bones and flesh broken, and some of them had their blood splattered everywhere. For a moment, they were mixed with the snow and mud. Looking again, many of the swordsmen's sword lights had also pierced into the faint green brilliance, and the sword lights around these swordsmen had also blocked the corrosion of the faint green brilliance. All of the sword lights were aimed precisely at the soul cultivator's forehead, right in between his eyebrows. But as soon as the sword lights got close to the soul cultivator, a roar could be heard coming from the spirit beasts beneath the soul cultivator. From their mouths, noses, and feet, different colored lights could be seen shooting out from their mouths, noses, and feet to block the sword lights with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Just like that, The incomparably sharp flying sword of the soul cultivator was blocked by the spirit beasts. Wah! While chanting, the soul cultivator swung the sword in his hand. A strange wave of energy came out from the soul armament to attack the sword cultivator. Bzz bzz. Some of the swordsmen were able to defend against the soul cultivator's attack, while others were unable to defend against the soul cultivator's attack. Some of the swordsmen were forced to retreat, while others fell from the sky as if they had lost consciousness. Of course, there were also powerful sword cultivators who managed to break through the soul cultivator's defense. Their sword lights were like lightning, and their sword lights were like rainbows as they pierced through the soul cultivator's forehead and killed him on top of his spirit beast. But strangely enough, the spirit beasts didn't break free from the soul cultivator's control because of the soul cultivator's death. Instead, they let out mournful howls, withered to the ground, and slowly lost their life force. Then, they launched their final attack and died under the sword cultivator's sword. Not a single one of them survived. The entire battlefield was filled with the sounds of battle, and the chanting of the soul cultivator grew louder and louder. Even though Xiaohua was hidden in the distance, his forehead was still slightly swollen and trembling. It was even a little hot. So this is how soul cultivators fight. Xiaohua was afraid of being discovered by the soul cultivators and sword cultivators, so he didn't dare to release his divine will and Buddhist awareness. Instead, he used the demon realm's concealment technique to hide in midair. As he observed carefully, he couldn't help but think to himself, this soul cultivator's technique is really mysterious. Even though this young master has cultivated the art of soul cultivation to the level of pure spirit heaven, I'm still confused. I don't know if this soul cultivator is using soul threads, or just relying on soul items. However, from now on, this young master somewhat understood that the physique of a soul cultivator is not as strong as that of a sword cultivator, and they don't have as many offensive techniques as the cultivators of my Dao sect. They also need to rely on the strength of spirit beasts to defend themselves. In fact, the life and death of these spirit beasts are tied together with the life and death of the soul cultivator. But why don't these swordsmen form a powerful sword formation? Aren't the yin-yang sword formation and the 5 elements splitting edge sword formation extremely powerful? Also, these sword cultivators, aren't they too ostentatious? The battle between them and my Dao sect hasn't ended yet, and they've provoked the soul cultivators here. How many swordsmen do they have in Huan Kingdom? Can they resist the pincer attack of the Dao sect and millions of Meng Mountains? While Xiaohua was lost in thought, the battle raged on. Swordsmen fell one after another, and the dark and skinny soul cultivators fell as well. Sword cultivators and soul cultivators were tangled up in a melee, and corpses were being tossed to the ground one after another. However, the dark green aura didn't decline. Instead, as the number of vengeful souls increased, it became even redder. Of course, the sword cultivators who could fight until now all had some tricks up their sleeves. The ordinary tricks of soul cultivators were useless and couldn't hurt their souls. Comparatively speaking, how could the soul cultivators be ordinary? They also had defensive techniques that could block the flying swords of the sword cultivators. Roughly 4 hours later, more than half of the tens of thousands of sword cultivators and soul cultivators had perished. The entire battle seemed to be in a stalemate. Coo-coo, the ear-piercing cry of a bird pierced Xiaohua's ears like a sharp sword. It was a very strange sound. Xiaohua's body trembled, and he nearly broke free from his concealment technique. When he turned his head to look at the source of the sound, he was even more shocked. Chapter 2788. Behind the soul cultivator, there was a dense swarm of spirit fowl flying through the air. These spirit fowl were vastly different from the spirit fowl of the Dao school. Not only were their feathers not as bright and colorful, their bodies weren't as light either. The spirit fowl in front was roughly 30 meters long. The 80-meter-long body was as thick as a mountain and covered in dense patterns. Some of the patterns looked like eyes, some looked like skeletons, and there were even some that looked like corpses dripping with blood. The front of the spirit fowl had a small head that was flat and a tail that was about 20 meters long. The wings on the back of the spirit fowl were several meters long and shone with a grayish-black light. On top of the spirit fowl was a skinny soul warrior. He wore simple black armor and held a trident in his hand that was about a meter long. The soul warrior's eyes shone brightly. Even though the armor covered his face, Xiaohua could still see the sharpness in his eyes. Behind the soul warrior were 100 or so other soul warriors. Their spirit fowl couldn't compare to the spirit fowl of the soul warrior in front, but they were still several meters long and had different patterns on them. Outside of the soul warrior's armor, his bare skin was covered in strange black and white patterns, just like the previous soul warriors. Behind them were several tens of thousands of soul warriors. They weren't wearing any armor. Aside from the spirit fowl they rode, they were all similar to the soul warriors fighting on the ground. That ear-piercing shriek came from the spirit bird at the front. The spirit bird's sharp gaze swept across the battlefield, and it let out a few goo-goo sounds. In an instant, the entire group of spirit birds became noisy. They did not even need the leader at the front to give the order, and they all swooped down. Whiz whiz. The sword cultivators on the ground were terrified by the approach of the soul cultivators. Their swords let out a mournful wail as they flew up into the air, circled around in midair, and then charged in the opposite direction of the soul cultivators, disregarding everything else. As for the soul cultivators' spirit beasts, they were enormous in size, but also incredibly fast. Hundreds of spirit beasts led the charge, causing the air to tremble as they flew across the battlefield in pursuit of the soul cultivators. More and more swordsmen fell to the soul warriors' soul armaments and spirit beasts. The entire army of swordsmen was completely defeated, and the remaining tens of thousands of swordsmen fled in panic. All the soul warriors, regardless of whether they were on the ground or in the air, had to chase after them. Woo! An extremely cheerful cry came out from the spirit warrior's mouth. All of the soul cultivators stopped what they were doing, and all of the soul warriors began to cheer. Then, all of the soul warriors landed on the ground and began to dance. It was almost as if they were celebrating. Xiaohua was very familiar with the way they danced. Wasn't it similar to the way the primordial spirit danced in the mysterious dark clouds? As for those spirit beasts, they were either dancing on the ground or dancing in the air. All of them were familiar with each other, and all of them cooperated harmoniously. Motherfucker, this is possible? Xiaohua watched in disbelief as the limbs of these spirit warriors began to perform unimaginable movements. As the spirit warriors danced, their previously pale faces and even their shriveled bodies regained their vigor and vitality. Their bodies were also somewhat plump. I understand now. Xiaohua suddenly realized. These soul cultivators need to use soul techniques in battle, and these soul warriors must have damaged their bodies. These soul cultivators are actually using the primordial spirit cultivation method on their bodies. This is a way to make up for the injuries they've suffered before. As expected, the green light that filled the battlefield had already dimmed. It seemed to have been absorbed by the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. The soul warriors rejoiced for at least an hour. Then, they cheered as they rushed into the mud and blood. They lifted up the bodies of the sword cultivators and swiftly cut off the heads. Then they took the vines from their waists and strapped them to their chests. As for the bodies and storage bags, they placed them on the backs of the spirit beasts. For a moment, blood flowed out and dripped onto the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts. However, they simply turned a blind eye to it. Looking at their skillful selection and searching everywhere, Xiaohua understood that these bodies were killed by the soul cultivators themselves. When everyone found the bodies of the swordsmen they had killed, they quietly looked at the soul cultivator in front of them. When the soul cultivator made a strange sound and raised his hand, everyone became even more frenzied. They were no longer as orderly as before. Instead, they began to snatch the bodies of the swordsmen. This time, not only were they snatching the bodies of the swordsmen, but they were also snatching the bodies of the soul cultivators and spirit beasts that had fallen. Alas, uncivilized people! A land of barbarians, Xiaohua shook his head and sighed. No wonder the cultivators of my Dao sect, and even the swordsmen, don't put these millions of soul cultivators in their eyes. After the time it took to eat a meal, they saw that there was nothing but broken limbs, mud, and blood on the battlefield. Only then did all the soul cultivators regroup and slowly return to where they came from. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to show himself. Instead, he waited for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before he used the Devil World's concealment technique to fly towards the battlefield. He had just flown to a place a few dozen meters away from the battlefield when the smell of blood that soared to the sky filled his mouth and nose. Within this smell of blood that didn't disperse for a long time, there was even an incomparably vicious aura. Although Xiaohua didn't release the Buddha Saraira, he could still deeply feel the anguished wails of the fallen souls on the battlefield. Alas, Xiaohua sighed. Just as he was about to reveal himself and release the Buddha's Saraira, he suddenly frowned and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. Not far from where he was, he saw a woman with a slim figure flying toward him on a cloud. If he saw this woman anywhere else, Xiaohua might not have paid attention to her. But this place had just experienced a great battle between sword cultivators and soul cultivators, and the smell of blood had yet to dissipate. How could he not be astonished when this woman appeared? However, when the woman flew closer, Xiaohua unconsciously became a little absent-minded. The woman was in her early teens. Her delicate face was rosy and cute, and her eyes were as thin as the moon. Her two faint eyebrows hung above the crescent moon like a wisp of smoke. Coupled with her light red lips and small upturned nose, she was as elegant as an ink painting. Coupled with her two little braids, she was even prettier than the girls who walked out of the New Year's painting. If the woman's appearance was like this, then there was no need to talk about her figure. Her waist was as thin as a willow branch, and her upper body was dressed in a thin green robe. The slight bulge in front of her chest was a clear indication of her youthful beauty. As for the woman's lower body, she was dressed in a red dress. Under the dress, her snow-white calves were straight and delicate, and her bare ankles and feet were round and delicate. This woman was actually so alluring. Although she was still young, and there was still some immaturity between her eyebrows, in Xiaohua's eyes, his heart couldn't help but be stirred. "Seat, this woman is a little strange." Xiaohua was absent-minded for a moment. Then he immediately sucked in a breath of cold air and hurriedly shifted his gaze away from the woman's body. However, the woman's slim figure and white feet were still swaying in front of his eyes. It's still a little strange." Xiaohua regained his senses and suddenly came to a realization. After looking at her for a while, I only felt that this woman's eyes were full of spirit. I actually didn't look carefully at her eyes. Sure enough, when Xiaohua carefully looked at the woman's eyes again, those moon-like eyes were really like smoke. The eyes in her eyes seemed to be there but not there. For a moment, it was an ordinary pitch-black color, and for a moment, it was like a misty deep pool, and as Xiaohua focused his gaze seemed to be about to sink into the woman's eyes. See, Xiaohua's mind was slightly blurred, and God's guidance operated vigilantly. Xiaohua immediately came to his senses and hurriedly retracted his gaze, then sucked in a breath of cold air again. Strange, strange. Where did this woman come from? Xiaohua secretly shouted. His heart was filled with doubts. This woman didn't realize that she was being spied on by Xiaohua, and while jumping and jumping, she flew onto the battlefield. When she saw the cruelty of the battlefield, the woman's brows slightly wrinkled. She hesitated for a moment in midair, then she actually descended a bit, slowly flying on the battlefield. As she flew, her lips slightly moved, and her gaze scanned the surroundings, as if she was looking for something. About the time it took to smoke a cigarette, the woman roughly looked over the battlefield once, then flew up again with some disappointment, looking around. It should be here. I can't be wrong. But there's nothing here? The woman's voice was like a silver bell, and even more so like a clear spring gurgling out of a mountain rock, cool and refreshing to the ear. What is this girl looking for? Xiaohua couldn't help but feel anxious for her, wishing that he could help her find it. Come out. I can see you. The woman shouted towards a certain place, as if she was playing hide and seek with someone else. Xiaohua hid there and couldn't help but smile. He had always been here, but he had never seen anyone else hiding there. How could he not know that this was the woman's bluff? If it was somewhere else, Xiaohua might have flown out and said a few words to this woman. But this place was Huan country, and a great battle had just happened. This woman suddenly appeared, although she didn't have an inch of armor, and he couldn't see any special cultivation. Who knew what this woman's background was? Of course, Xiaohua was almost certain that this woman was definitely not a sword cultivator, nor was she a cultivator of the Dao sect, but was she a soul cultivator? Thinking about that ugly and barbaric soul cultivator just now, Xiaohua himself denied it. Were soul cultivators such beautiful people? Chapter 2789. How could this girl, who was still a budding flower but was already so attractive, be an unenlightened person like Wan Shan in Meng Mountain? But this girl wasn't a swordsman, nor was she a cultivator or a soul warrior. Who could she be? If she was an ordinary woman, no one would believe that she would be able to wear thin clothes in the cold weather of the Huan Kingdom, not to mention that she would be able to come here on a cloud. Since he couldn't see her cultivation level, then it could be said that she was unfathomable. Even though Xiaohua didn't have any warning signs and didn't feel that this girl was a threat to him, he still didn't want to show himself. If worst comes to worst, I'll let her search here for half a day. If she doesn't see anyone, won't she leave? Although Xiaohua was somewhat anxious, he didn't dare to act rashly. He was really afraid that if he moved, he would be discovered by this strange girl. Unexpectedly, the girl circled around to the left and unexpectedly landed. She calmly sat down on a pile of snow and casually grabbed a clump of snow in her hand. Using a bit of strength, she squeezed it into a snowball. Looking left and right, she swung her arm and threw it out. Papa! It smashed into some gray vegetation on the snow. Immediately, the girl used her hand to support her cheek and lowered her head to look at the snow and mud. She seemed somewhat absent-minded. Seeing that the girl had actually sat there for half a day, Xiaohua somewhat couldn't bear it. He had no reason to accompany this girl who seemed to be playing here and wasting time for no reason. Since he couldn't ask for directions here, he might as well go somewhere else to look. Thinking, Xiaohua slightly moved and was about to use a concealment technique to leave. But just as he moved, the girl raised her head and looked at Xiaohua's location. She playfully said, "I see you, quickly come out." The girl raised her face and smiled like a flower. It was a kind of smile that came from the heart. "I've been waiting for you for so long, you actually didn't come out to see me? Are you willing to let me wait for you in this world of ice and snow?" Xiaohua sighed, knowing that he was still discovered by this girl. His figure flashed in midair, and he touched his nose and said with a bitter smile, "Little girl, the person you're looking for isn't here. I've already stopped here for half a day. Besides the soul cultivator and swordsman who were fighting just now, no one else has come. If you want to find someone, you should go somewhere else." "How did you know that I was looking for someone else?" The girl stood up, tilted her head and looked at Xiaohua. She smiled and said, "Why am I not looking for you?" "Are you looking for me?" Xiaohua was greatly surprised. "You and I have never met before. You? Why are you looking for me?" "Don't ask me why I'm looking for you." The girl chuckled. "Let me ask you first, are you looking for someone?" That's right. How do you know I'm looking for someone?" Xiaohua asked curiously. "But aren't you looking for someone too?" Don't ask me how I know you're looking for someone. I only know that I know you're looking for someone, just like how I know I'm looking for you. Moreover, I can only find you here." Although these words were extremely difficult to pronounce, this girl's words were very catchy and pleasant to listen to. "Well, since you know I'm looking for someone, then tell me where the person I'm looking for is." Xiaohua said helplessly, "Then, tell me why you're looking for me." The girl tilted her head slightly and said with a smile, "My name is Jioxia. What's your name?" "My name is Xiaohua." Xiaohua did not hide anything and replied, "Xiaohua? Strange. Why are you called Xiaohua?" Hearing Xiaohua's name, Jioxia was a little surprised. After thinking for a moment, she asked, other than Xiaohua, do you have any other names? Oh. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat, and asked curiously, what do you think my name should be? Hee hee, looks like you're really called Xiaohua. Jiao Xia giggled and said, but why did you, a Dao Sex Jindan stage cultivator, run to the sword domain? At this time, isn't the battle between the Dao sect and the sword cultivators going on in the Sky Patrol City? Aren't I looking for someone? Xiaohua also smiled slightly. Nothing is more important than looking for someone. Don't you think so? Right, looking for someone is the most important thing. Jiao Xia said with a smile. Although I am Xiaohua and don't have any other names, but can you tell me where the person I'm looking for is? Xiaohua asked. Unfortunately, Jiao Xia shook her head slightly. Where is the person you're looking for? I don't know. But I know where you should go. Where to? Xiaohua asked. Sword Peak. Jiao Xia replied without hesitation. Sword Peak? Where is that? Xiaohua was slightly stunned and asked, is it near the Flowing Cloud Lake? Flowing Cloud Lake. Jiao Xia thought for a moment, then shook her head. The Flowing Cloud Lake is a place at the border between the Million Meng Mountains and the Sword Domain, but the Sword Peak is within the Sword Domain, and the two are in different directions. In which direction is the Flowing Cloud Lake? Xiaohua asked. Unfortunately, at this point, Jiao Xia did not answer, and instead asked, don't you want to know why I'm looking for you? Xiaohua answered without hesitation, but I want to know where the Flowing Cloud Lake is even more. I want to ask you for a favor. Jiao Xia hesitated slightly, however, I know that if I say it now, you will definitely refuse, so I can't tell you right now. Strange, you didn't say that I know if I can help you? If you want me to help you, you must tell me first. Xiaohua was even more puzzled. But Jiao Xia still shook her head. You don't have to ask this, I naturally know that you will refuse once I say it. Forget it, tell me where the Flowing Cloud Lake is. Xiaohua said helplessly. You don't have to go to the Flowing Cloud Lake, you can go directly to the Sword Peak. Jiao Xia did not tell Xiaohua the location of the Flowing Cloud Lake. Why should I listen to you? Xiaohua looked up and down at Jiao Xia. If you don't tell me the direction of the Flowing Cloud Lake, I can go to other places to ask. This is the battlefield of sword cultivators and soul cultivators. Jiao Xia said with a smile, I'm afraid you can't understand the words of soul cultivators. And sword cultivators are all in groups. You, a cultivator of the Dao sect, want to ask for directions. I'm afraid it won't be easy, right? Don't worry about that. Xiaohua snorted coldly. And you should have a way to ask. Jiao Xia was not angry and said indifferently, but if you go to the Flowing Cloud Lake, then your beloved will lose her life. Only if you go to the Sword Peak and bring me along will your beloved be able to live. Do you believe it? Are you willing to bet? Why would I bet with you for no reason? Xiaohua was happy. Since you know everything, what else do you want to bet with me? Jiao Xia smiled slightly with a face full of pride and said, actually, I only know that I can find someone here, he can help me a lot. And I also know where to go next. As for the rest, it's all my own guesses. You guessed it yourself? Xiaohua was stunned. You said it so well, I thought you knew. How did you know? Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish speaking, Jiao Xia interrupted him and said, you, a cultivator of the Dao sect, actually took the risk of a great sword battle to accompany this person to the sword domain, and even went so deep. I'm afraid everyone knows about the dangers involved, right? Tell me, if it was just a normal friendship, would you take such a huge risk? This. Xiaohua laughed bitterly again, and couldn't help but rub his nose again. He was somewhat at a loss for words, and his previous abnormal vigilance had also relaxed a little. Although the true essence around his body was circulating from time to time, guarding against Jiao Xia's sneak attack at any time, Xiaohua really believed that she didn't have any ill intentions. You don't have to let your guard down like this. It's better to circulate the true essence protecting your body. Jiao Xia said mischievously. Who knows if I have any ulterior motives towards you? Xiaohua's mind moved. and his true essence slightly slackened. Jiao Xia sensed it and said with a sharp mind. Do. Xiaohua was helpless. This Jiao Xia was indeed very sensitive, as if she knew the spiritual qi of heaven and earth and even the movements of other people like the back of her hand. However, this sensitivity, when compared to her exquisite heart aperture, was extremely inferior. It was as if she could completely guess his thoughts with just a single sentence. However, don't worry, I still need to ask you for help, so how could I attack you? Jiao Xia said again, moreover, I can't see through your cultivation. If you want to escape, I definitely won't be able to catch up to you. Xiaohua saw that Jiao Xia was so confident, and just as he was about to say something, she didn't give him the time or opportunity to do so, and continued, moreover, when you saw me, you were only slightly absent-minded, and your mind wasn't lost at all. Either you practiced a secret technique, or you have a beloved Tao companion in your heart. For a young cultivator like you with a profound cultivation, the female cultivators chasing after you are like moths to a flame. Xiaohua opened his mouth again. Sure. Jiao Xia stretched out her index finger and placed it on her lips. This action caused Xiaohua's heart to jump, and he couldn't help but stop talking, as if he was afraid of destroying the beauty within. Wait for me to finish speaking. That kind of coquettishness was very natural, but it was also extremely seductive and infectious. Xiaohua looked at her in a daze, and didn't say anything else. Jiao Xia was very satisfied and said again, rather than believe that you practiced a secret technique, it's better to believe that you already have a beloved Tao companion in your heart. Moreover, you wanted to ask me for directions as soon as we met, so naturally, you're burning with impatience to find her. If it wasn't for your beloved, would you prepare to leave this place in such a hurry? You don't even want to say a few more words to me? Ordinary people have an old saying, as long as there are 3 reasons to do something, then it should be done. I can find so many reasons for this matter, so do you think I'm still not sure? Chapter 2790. You are really too smart. Xiaohua helplessly nodded his head. He shifted his gaze away from Jiao Xia's beautiful face, which was inferior to her intelligence. He muttered, although what you said is not correct, but your guess is correct. Where did I guess wrong? Jiao Xia asked in disbelief. No need. You don't know everything. Being able to guess the result is already very good. Xiaohua was powerless to argue with her. He waved his hand and said, since you already know that I am going to find my lover, then quickly tell me what I can help you with so that I can go to Flowing Cloud Lake. Jiao Xia shook her head and said, you are wrong. Didn't I just say it? If I say it now, you definitely won't help me. Why should I say it? Secondly, you definitely can't go to Flowing Cloud Lake. You are going to Sword Edge Peak. Moreover, when you go to Sword Edge Peak, you should also bring me along. Bring you along? Xiaohua was really puzzled. He looked at the exceptionally intelligent and mysterious Jiao Xia and said, I don't even know who you are, let alone where you came from. Why should I bring you along? My name is Jiao Xia. Didn't I just say it? Jiao Xia mischievously said, as for where I come from, is that important? Moreover, I am only following you to see what you can help me with. When I am able to ask you for help, I will ask you for help. So, you still don't know what you need my help with? Xiaohua suddenly realized. Jiao Xia slyly replied. I didn't promise to help you. Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand. What a joke. Even this mysterious Jiao Xia couldn't do it. How could he do it? He definitely couldn't agree to such a difficult task. You will definitely agree. Jiao Xia confidently replied. Impossible. Xiaohua shook his head like a rattledrum. Unexpectedly, Jiao Xia didn't argue with him like before. Instead, she smiled and said, it's okay. If you are not willing to help when I ask you for help, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Just pretend that you've never seen me alone. Xiaohua had always been amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Hearing this girl's pitiful words, he hesitated and wanted to say something. Jiuxia flew up first and said, "Let's go. Just now, we could dawdle for a while to dispel your suspicions. But now we have to go. If you don't go now, your lover will be in trouble." "You're going too?" Xiaohua helplessly asked. "You just need to point in the direction of Flowing Cloud Lake." "Not only me, but the place we're going to isn't Flowing Cloud Lake either." Jiuxia corrected him again, but this time he spat out, "The Sword Edge Peak is a part of the Sword Domain, and it only takes a few days to reach there. The Flowing Cloud Lake is far, and you won't be able to reach there in less than 10 days. Could it be that you want to give up what's close at hand and seek what's far away?" "Alright." Hearing that the Sword Edge Peak wasn't far, Xiaohua agreed. If he didn't meet Fairy Hongxia and the others at the Sword Edge Peak, he could still speed up and reach the Flowing Cloud Lake. Looking at Jiuxia's mysterious appearance, if Fairy Hongxia really went to the Sword Edge Peak because of some accident and he didn't go to rescue her, wouldn't he regret it for the rest of his life? However, seeing that Jiuxia didn't turn back, it was as if she already knew that he had to go with her. Forget it. Xiaohua didn't have any countermeasures to deal with this seemingly harmless girl. He sighed and followed her. "Is this the lightning evasion technique? It's actually so powerful." Seeing Xiaohua using the lightning evasion technique to chase after her, Jiuxia was somewhat astonished. I am a disciple of the Imperial Lightning Sect in the country of Xi. Naturally, I know the lightning evasion technique." This wasn't considered a secret, so Xiaohua didn't hesitate to answer. "That is really strange." Jiuxia didn't feel relieved because of Xiaohua's answer. Instead, she was somewhat puzzled and slightly frowned. This frown of Jiuxia's seemed to be a casual action, but it was filled with endless charm. It actually made Xiaohua's heart ache slightly. I finally understand." Xiaohua hurriedly shifted his gaze away and sighed. "This Jiuxia isn't too beautiful. It's just that her aura is truly superhuman. Moreover, there's a natural charm on top of her aura. This charm seeps into her bones and makes people involuntarily feel pity for her." After flying for a few days, seeing Jiuxia constantly changing directions and not flying directly towards the sun, Xiaohua was somewhat bewildered. He couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you flying directly towards the Sword Edge Peak? But why do you keep changing directions?" "Change directions?" Jiuxia was somewhat stunned. "When did I change directions? I've always been flying towards the Sword Edge Peak." Xiaohua pointed at the sun and said, "In these few days, you've already deviated from the sun several times." "The sun's direction?" Jiuxia was even more shocked. She raised her head to look at the sun and then looked at the direction she was flying in. She was very puzzled. It seems that even with Jiuxia's intelligence, she still couldn't understand Xiaohua's poor sense of direction. "You tell me the direction, I'll lead the way." Xiaohua said somewhat unconvinced. "Naturally, it's in front." Jiuxia chuckled as she looked at Xiaohua and pointed. "Aye, that's right." Xiaohua slapped his forehead. Facing Jiuxia, he seemed to have really become an idiot. Immediately after, Xiaohua flew forward. However, because Jiuxia was behind him, Xiaohua was afraid that he would fly in the wrong direction. After flying for a while, he peeked at the sun and then flew again. However, not long after flying, Jiuxia flew up with a smile like a flower and said, "Don't fly, you've already flown in the wrong direction." "How is that possible?" Xiaohua looked at the sun in the sky in disbelief. The position didn't change at all. Although Jiuxia had a smile on her face, she didn't have any intention of ridicule. She pointed at the sun in the sky and explained, "You're using the sun as the indicator, so naturally it's not wrong. However, the sun of the Sword Domain is different from the sun of the Cultivation 3 nations. Don't look at how it's always hanging there motionlessly. In fact, it has long changed its position. It's just that the sky is really big, so you didn't notice it." "This sun is also changing its position?" Xiaohua was instantly exposed by Jiuxia, but he didn't find it strange. He asked curiously, "The Huan nation isn't that far from the Cultivation 3 nations. Why is there such a big difference in the astronomical phenomena?" As the secular people say, People in the same village have different sounds. Isn't that the case? Jiao Xia said very patiently, don't look at how the sword domain is close to the Shi nation and the Huan nation. The sword domain is a long and narrow territory like a curved canyon. It's also located in the extreme north. That sun, oh, there's no need to say more. Isn't the alternation of the sun and moon greatly different from the Shi nation? This is true. Xiao Huan nodded helplessly. This kind of phenomenon is common in the Dawn Rain continent. Perhaps you'll naturally know in the future. Jiao Xia didn't seem to like to explain, but she really needed Xiao Hua's help, so she patiently explained. However, she didn't want to say more, so she changed the topic. Besides, just now, didn't you feel that you were flying straight? Although you occasionally looked at the sun, the direction didn't change? How did you know I was going to say it? Xiao Hua was astonished. These words were exactly what he wanted to refute Jiao Xia, but after hearing Jiao Xia's explanation, he felt a little guilty and didn't dare to say anything. Don't tell me you know everything? This is also my guess. Jiao Xia seemed to like to show off her cleverness, and she was happy to explain this kind of extremely accurate guess. Actually, everyone's feeling is based on the things around them as a reference. Just now, you felt that you were flying straight, but in fact, you've been using the sun as a reference. The real you has already deviated from the real direction. Of course, even if there's no reference, when people are flying, 99% of them will deviate from their own direction. Believing in feelings is actually not reliable. It's just that there are some places to refer to, so you can correct your direction. Isn't that so? Xiao Hua thought for a bit. Not to mention that Jiao Xia's words were quite profound. Even if it was based on his normal experience of finding his destination, Jiao Xia's words were extremely accurate. But, you came here to find me, isn't it just a feeling? Xiao Hua said rather unconvinced. My feeling is different from others. Jiao Xia said with a smile. I'm the one who's outside of the 99%. Jiao Xia was so happy, and in these few days, Xiao Hua's vigilance had been greatly reduced, almost treating her as the little sister next door. What else can you guess? Xiao Hua also tilted his head and asked. Can guess. Next, you'll let me lead the way. Jiao Xia covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. Yeah, this seems like I can guess it myself. Xiao Hua was speechless. Let's go. Jiao Xia waved her hand and flew to the front. Only then was Xiao Hua truly convinced and obediently flew behind Jiao Xia. However, looking at Jiao Xia happily jumping and flying in front of him, and then looking at her graceful waist and smooth lines, cough cough, it seems like it's not bad. Another 2 days passed, and a perfectly straight mountain peak appeared in front of him. It was like a treasured sword piercing into the sky from the ground. Xiao Hua understood that this should be the Sword Edge Peak. The miraculous creation of heaven and earth is nothing more than this. The 3 peaks of Taiqing sect, Tianzhu Peak of Lian country, and the Sword Edge Peak of Huan country are all similar. They are all so majestic. When Xiao Hua saw the Sword Edge Peak, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion as he recalled his encounter at Tianzhu Peak. Legend has it that the Sword Edge Peak of the Sword Domain was left behind by a sword god. At that time, a devil god from the upper realm escaped to the Sword Domain for some unknown reason. He ate swordsmen alive and wanted to turn the Sword Domain into a devil world. This sword god fought with the demonic god of the lower realm for dozens of days before finally defeating and killing the demonic god. However, the sword god himself died from heavy injuries. This Sword Edge Peak is formed from the divine sword in his hand. Jiao Xia explained with a smile as he flew ahead without turning his head. Chapter 2791. I don't care who created this sword peak. I just want to know where I can. Xiao Hua had already released his divine sense, but he could not find any trace of Fairy Hong Xia and the others. Just as he was talking to Jiao Xia with a smile, he suddenly stopped. The smile froze on his face and disappeared in an instant. A layer of frost hung on his face. There are 6 third-grade illusory swordsmen over there. I can't guarantee that I can kill all of them at the same time. If you help me, I will definitely help you. Hee, I told you that you would definitely agree to help me. Jiuxia laughed, but then she said, however, this is not my help. You don't have to promise me now. This kind of bullying, even if it was me, I would still take action. So, I won't take this opportunity to blackmail you. Up to you. Xiaohua's tone had already turned cold. The brilliance around his body flickered. Rumble. Thunder rumbled from under his feet. His entire figure streaked across the sky and flew towards a certain direction at lightning speed. Jiuxia's small mouth opened slightly. She looked at Xiaohua's imperial thunder transformation with some surprise. Then, a burst of splendor appeared in her eyes. There was even a thoughtful look on her face. Sure enough, my calculation was right. This Xiaohua is indeed the person who can solve this predicament. But, how can he solve this huge predicament? This really makes me puzzled. Jiuxia whispered and flew away. Although she could not catch up with Xiaohua, she was not much slower. Senior brother. On the flowing cloud airship, Li Zongbao spat out a mouthful of blood. He could no longer support himself and collapsed on the flowing cloud airship. His face was pale gold, obviously the result of forcefully activating the immortal slaying whip. Fairy Hongxia could not help but cry out, reaching out to support Li Zongbao. Unfortunately, Fairy Hongxia herself was now an arrow at the end of its flight. Even moving her body was difficult. Although Xiao Mao could move at this time, he did not dare to slack off. He also used the dragon transformation art. The true core strength in his body poured into the flowing cloud airship like it was a spirit stone. He tried his best to activate the airship, trying to escape from the siege of the 6th third-grade illusory swordsman. I'm fine. Li Zongbao slumped on the flying boat and struggled to pull out a jade bottle. Senior brother, I still have some pills here. It's from Xiaolongxin. Fairy Hongxia clapped her hands hurriedly and took out a jade bottle from her storage bag and handed it to Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao coughed, and blood gushed out of his mouth as he took the spirit pill and said, Ahem, this guy, he actually forgot about his friends for the sake of his lover. It's been so long, yet he still hasn't given me a spirit pill. Seeing Li Zongbao's rare teasing, Fairy Hongxia blushed slightly and whispered, he has always been a careless person. If senior brother wants it, you can ask. He is generous to his own family. I don't want it. I want to see when he'll remember it. Li Zongbao took the pill. His complexion improved a little as he spoke indifferently. Fairy Hongxia's eyes flashed with a hint of confusion. If senior brother doesn't mention it, I'm afraid he'll never remember it for the rest of his life. Actually, there are times when this concubine is also puzzled. Darling Xiao is sometimes extremely stingy, but sometimes he is extremely generous. Sometimes he is extremely careless, but sometimes he is extremely meticulous. Sometimes his strength is frighteningly high, but sometimes his cultivation level is so low that it makes one laugh. Li Zongbao continued. Sometimes he is as shrewd as a merchant, but sometimes he is as careless as a child. Xiao Mao could not help but chime in as well. It seemed like the three of them knew that they were in danger and would not be able to escape. Xiaohua was thousands of miles away. Even if he wanted to rescue them, he would not be able to make it in time. Where did you tell Xiaohua to meet up? Li Zongbao closed his eyes and asked softly. Drifting Cloud Lake. Fairy Hongxia answered without hesitation, that is the entrance to Million Meng Mountains from Huan Country. It is also a slightly safer passage to Million Meng Mountains. What a pity. Li Zongbao sighed. Xiaohua is the best at getting lost. If he could get lost from Drifting Cloud Lake to here, that would be great. He is a directionally challenged idiot. Fairy Hongxia said with a smile, unable to hide her love for Xiaohua. Senior brotherly. Xiao Mao could not help but stutter. Senior sister, you guys listen. Fairy Hongxia and Li Zongbao were both injured. How could they be as strong as Xiao Mao? They glanced at each other in bewilderment. Thunder Thunder. Xiao Mao suddenly realized and shouted, "This seems to be Big Brother's lightning escape technique." How is that possible? Li Zongbao and Fairy Hongxia were both shocked. Drifting Cloud Lake was extremely far away. How could Xiao Hua fly here? Quick, fly towards the thunder. Li Zongbao ordered loudly. Perhaps Xiao Hua is being chased by the sword. Once they thought of Xiao Hua being chased by the sword, Li Zongbao and the rest were shocked. Xiao Hua had separated from them in order to avoid the transformation sword. However, after the three of them circled around outside, they ran into this place again and ran into the transformation sword again. Xiao Mao hesitated. Let's go. Now that things have come to this, to die together is also a blessing. Fairy Hongxia waved her hand and tried to open a small gap in the connate primordial water. Sure enough, in just a short moment, the sound of thunder resounded in the sky. Darling Xiao, Fairy Hongxia could not help but murmur, her eyes slightly hot. Terrifying phoenix. If Xiao Mao could hear it, how could the 6th grade 3 illusory swordsman not hear it? Xiang Mufeng, who was about to go around the sword edge peak, stopped in midair. His eyes flashed with hesitation. The divine sword mystic technique was what he wanted. Moreover, he had flown in front of everyone. Xiao Hua was flying in front of him. If he could get the divine sword mystic technique before everyone else, he might be able to get some other benefits. After all, according to the news that came out from the 7 spiritual mountains, Xiao Hua was able to break the Brahma Pagoda array of the 7 spiritual mountains. Naturally, there would be a jade slip inside the array in his storage pouch. Although the Divine Sword Secret Codex had already been discussed and all 6 of them had a share, that storage pouch, there was no discussion. Whoever could get it would get it. Thinking of this, Xiang Mufeng's heart became hot. He urged the sword under his feet to fly towards the direction of the sound of thunder. However, after flying for 100 feet, Xiang Mufeng calmed down and hesitated. Nonsense, it was not like he did not know the expression of the terrifying phoenix when it killed the 4 grade 3 illusory swordsman. Didn't he team up with Wang Jingqiang and the rest for this reason? How could he fly there alone? Wouldn't he be sending himself to death? Thinking of this, Xiang Mufeng hurriedly turned around and flew towards the direction of the flowing cloud-flying ship. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.